You're listening to No Podcast for Old Men.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of No Podcast for Old Men, the only podcast wherein three university professors provide philosophical analysis of each and every Coen Brothers film in chronological order. Today is our 9th episode, and therefore we will be discussing the 9th Coen Brothers film, The Man Who Wasn't There. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Robert Jones. I am one of the three co-hosts of the program. I'm joined from Louisville, Kentucky, Professor Peter S. Fossil. Peter Fossil, how are you today?
Hi, Robert. It's great to be here. It's a kind of cloudy but beautiful day here in Kentucky.
That's nice. I like that. Over here, just a few miles from me, but still via the interwebbies, Professor Troy A. Jollymore. Troy, how are you today?
Doing just fine. Happy to be here, and good to see you guys.
Great to be back on the, I don't know, is this the airwaves? The whatever the,
the something waves.
Something
back on the waves.
Well, okay, thanks for tuning in. And we have a little format we do. We do different things, and we usually start off with our lightning round. It's basically a brief opening statement on what we think, in a nutshell, the film, in this case, The Man Who Wasn't There, what it's about. And usually we go to Petey. Is that right? Professor Fossils are usually our Peter
That's right.
S. Fossil.
That's right.
What do you think, in a nutshell?
S for Stanislaus, right?
Stanislaus, that's awesome.
The Man Who Wasn't There is a noir film set not in the grimy underworlds of L.A., New York, or New Orleans, but rather in the meretricious suburban wasteland that the conquered Wild West had by 1949 become. It's not a film about hard-boiled male detective and his alluring femme fatale battling sinister forces, but instead of a different and lesser kind of man, a no kind of man, a lower middle-class cuckold never fully having been there on planet Earth, losing a puny battle with nihilism and bad luck amidst the vapid material and political supremacy of the post-World War II American dream. We are not taken into the teeming lower world beneath the manicured lawns of David Lynch's Blue Velvet. Instead, we find the heart of darkness, actually not even that, rather the horrifying neither light nor dark vacuum right there above ground in the department stores, bungalows, and barbershops of small-town America. The Man Who Wasn't There, that is a dark film about despair, impotence, and hollow, pointless desire. It's a film about people inhabiting forms of life that have been foisted on them as ideal and desirable, but in truth are no such thing, and leave these hapless white Americans empty, bewildered, longing, loveless, and lifeless, both metaphorically and literally. Usually involving money, their forms of life and forms of imagination limit even the desperate possibilities for escape to which the film's characters turn in their pathetic struggles to overcome disappointment, alienation, and powerlessness. Contrary to their sad hopes, they become phony war heroes, phony commercial successes with phony hair, phony Christians, and phony spouses, all choking on the bowl of cherries that post-war American splendor had promised would be so satisfying.
Whoa.
Nice. And Peter, I have to compliment you, your strategy. Like half of the things you said were negative thing, what this movie is not. I love it. I love the approach of, well, this movie's not this, not that, and also not this. I like your style.
It wasn't there, was it?
Yeah, that's right. The movie that wasn't there, yes.
This is Maimonides as Coen Brothers film criticism.
Troy Jollymore, Professor Jollymore. What's your little brief opening statement, lightning round synopsis of what the film The Man Who Wasn't There, what do you think it's about?
Well, let's see if lightning can strike twice. The Man Who Wasn't There is a visually stunning neo-noir, a beautiful black and white existentialist fable about modernity and modern life and the alienated characters who do their best to come to terms with it, but of course ultimately fail. It's about a man, Ed Crane, who is a barber, or maybe not. At least he occupies the role of barber. Just what he really is, what kind of man he is, seems to be a somewhat elusive question. Is he perhaps a criminal? Well, there's no doubt that in the course of the film he commits a couple of serious crimes. But like everyone around him in this absurdist universe, although he is ultimately punished, he's not punished for his crimes. It's a movie about alienation, about the struggle to make real contact with another person or with any part of reality, in a world in which there always seems to be a profound metaphysical gap standing in the way of such genuine contact. It's a movie about the mysteries of other people, not to mention how mysterious we can sometimes be to ourselves. It's about the limits of language. It's about freedom and entrapment, about the consolations of beauty and how easily they're lost. As the Coen brothers themselves said when pitching the movie to its star, Billy Bob Thornton, this is a movie about a barber who wants to be a dry cleaner.
Well, thank you, Troy Jolly Moore. Well, let me give my brief opening statement, which is not as eloquent as you two. But so for me, the first thing I want to say, it is a neo-noir, but it's a film about noir film. So it should be a meta neo-noir. It's another Coen brothers film, like Barton Fink, about appearance versus reality. Or to quote Riedenschneider, science, perception, reality, doubt. It's a film about knowledge versus belief. It's a film about deception, perfidy, as they say, deception of the characters, of themselves, and of we, the viewers. It's a film about modernity, and as you both said, it's a film about alienation, and a film about absurdism, and ultimately, like a lot of Coen brothers films, it's a film about nihilism. It's also a film about manhood and masculinity. And it's about a fear of, it's 1949, right? It takes place. So it's interesting the Coen brothers, they have, The Hudsucker takes place in 59 on the precipice of the 60s. This takes place in 49. So it's about the kind of white person's, middle-class Americans' fears of, quote, aliens and a changing America. So it's a film about the breakdown in the white, quote, American way of life, what French sociologist Émile Durkheim called anomie, the breakdown of a moral system and standards and that leaves people with moral dysregulation and leaves them adrift. It's also a film, as Walter Abundis tells it, it's a film about probity or questioning probity. And lastly, I'll say it's a film about class relations in America. So there's my less eloquent, but hopefully interesting list of nutshells.
I did not notice the lack of eloquence, I have to say, so that I was not struck by that alleged lack.
Well, thank you.
Me too. It was not a speech without eloquence.
I hope that Peter just continues to speak in negatives today. Like everything he
too
says.
Much a challenge. Okay, I'll try.
Now it's time to turn to Troy Jollimore. Let's get a little summary of the film, The Man Who Wasn't There.
All right, so The Man Who Wasn't There tells the story of Ed Crane, a barber in Santa Rosa in, as Robert mentioned, 1949. Ed, played by Billy Bob Thornton, as an almost affectless, fairly inscrutable man of few words, is married to the beautiful Doris, played by Coen regular Frances McDormand. Doris's brother Frank, played by Michael Badalucco, owns the barbershop where Ed works and is the head barber there. Meanwhile, Doris, who works at Nerdlinger's department store, is having an affair with her boss, Big Dave Brewster, who is played by the amazing James Gandolfini. What a cast in this film. Holy crap, what a cast. One day, a stranger, Creighton Tolliver, wanders into the shop. As Ed is trimming the very small amount of hair that Tolliver's head supports, he's played by John Polito, another Coen regular. The stranger lets slip some information about his current business venture, dry cleaning. Folks, you heard me right. Dry cleaning. No water. Well, this is familiar to us, of course, not too exciting. But dry cleaning was a radical innovation in 1949, or at least in the world of this film it was, and Ed finds that he can't stop thinking about it. All he needs is $10,000 to invest and make his fortune, a sum that is easily obtained by sending an anonymous blackmail letter to Big Dave threatening to reveal his affair to his wife if he doesn't come across. Well, Big Dave does come across. Ed gets the money. He delivers it to Tolliver. But then things start to unravel. Big Dave thinks that Creighton Tolliver is the blackmailer, and so he tracks him down and beats him up, in the end killing him. But in the process, Tolliver reveals that he got the $10,000 from Ed. The two meet in Big Dave's office. Big Dave confronts Ed with the very Coen brothers question, "What kind of man are you?" Then they fight. A fight that ends with Ed stabbing Big Dave in the neck with a little cigar knife that Dave allegedly got off a Japanese soldier in the Second World War. And I say allegedly because we will eventually learn that Big Dave's stories about being in active duty in that war are all fabrications. In fact, he had a desk job in San Diego. Ed returns home almost as if nothing has happened. Later on at the barbershop, he learns that Doris has been arrested for the murder of Big Dave. They hire the lawyer Freddie Riedenschneider, hotshot lawyer from Sacramento, played by Tony Shalhoub in his stellar, hilarious performance, his second appearance for the Coen brothers. Ed tries to tell Riedenschneider what really happened, but he's not interested. Facts are irrelevant. What matters to him is what story can he sell to the jury. Riedenschneider eventually comes up with a brilliant plan to save Doris by appealing to physicist Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. But when they show up on this first scheduled day of the trial, they discover that Doris has hanged herself in her prison cell. Ed learns not too long after that Doris was pregnant. We then learn that Ed and his wife had not had sex for a number of years. Presumably then the father-to-be was Big Dave. As all this has been going on, Ed has been taking an interest in Birdie, a young local girl played by Scarlett Johansson in a very early role for her, whose piano playing, she's especially fond of Beethoven, provides Ed with comfort and solace. As far as we can tell, this might be Ed's only aesthetic dimension, the only place where he seems to be alive to beauty, except maybe for the beauty of his wife. But again, they hadn't had sex in a while. Hard to say. Who knows? Ed, whom amusingly Birdie calls an enthusiast, arranges for Birdie to meet with a music teacher who he thinks might be able to help her hone her talent. But the music teacher, Jacques Carcanog, bursts his bubble, tells him that Birdie really isn't very good. Driving back from this discouraging encounter, Birdie, who it turns out is also a bit of an enthusiast, tries to thank Mr. Crane for his kind attentions with a few kind attentions of her own. That is, a little oral sex while he is driving. Folks, for those of you listening, this is neither advisable nor safe. And indeed, Ed loses control of the car, which crashes. Fortunately, neither Ed nor Birdie are seriously injured. However, Ed is almost immediately arrested by the police for the murder of Creighton Tolliver, whose corpse, along with paperwork signed by Ed, was found by the police. So the lawyer, Freddie Riedenschneider, returns, this time to defend Ed against his murder charge. He makes an impassioned speech about modern man and modern physics, among other things. But at its conclusion, an enraged Frank confronts Ed, repeats Big Dave's question, "What kind of man are you?" and then assaults him, punching him in the courtroom. A mistrial is declared. You might think this would be good news for Ed, but no. The trial is just going to take place again later, but at this point, having already mortgaged everything there is to mortgage, there's no more money to pay Riedenschneider, and Ed has to settle for a bargain attorney who advises him to plead guilty, which he does. He is indeed found guilty, and Ed Crane, barber and murderer, is sentenced to be executed for a murder he did not commit. The film ends with Ed about to be executed and musing in his typical fashion about the meaning of it all and what might be coming next.
Excellent. Wow. Okay. Well, what do you say we move on to our third theme, the political, social, cultural themes of the movie? And let's go over to Professor Fossil, Peter Fossil. Why don't you reflect on some of these themes?
Thank you. Well, I'll just lay some seeds here so we can talk about them. One thing to say immediately is that it's, I think, September 49, is it? That's when it was first disclosed, I think becomes public, that the Soviets have detonated an atomic weapon. And I think they had before, but it hadn't been public. And it's the very first thing that's said within the action of the movie as they're sitting there and saying, hey, the Soviets have detonated this bomb, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it, which is I thought really interesting because what really would have, most Americans say, like, we better like back to arms, and we got to like load up Europe with all kinds of things now. And, we got to crank up the defense budgets and whatever, which is what happened. But instead the remark is about powerlessness. And that to me was kind of a clue to something about this moment where so much is supposed about America, about its power, about its imperial position in the world, about the splendor and prosperity of the material production that's not just won the war, but now is going to flow into heightened, consumer living, in the suburbs of places like Santa Rosa. Now that the war is over and the U.S. dominates and controls, so much of the earth. So if not powerlessness, still there's something that's found to be fake about it, or empty, or not what the dream, should be. And so one way we see this is in desires that lead to trouble and that go unfulfilled. So Ed, for instance, let's just start with him. The first thing he says is, I worked as a barber, but I never thought of myself as a barber. So he's already, expressing some alienation from his work and from a sense of like, well, what is he then if he's not a barber? By the way, I think the film was just called The Barber Project at first. I think they started with that. But so he wants more. He doesn't want to just be a second chair, even though, as Doris's cousin says, it's a good trade. It's a good job. He's got a house, detached house with a gas fireplace and an ice machine, ice box or whatever the hell he talks about. But it's that's a pretty
garbage
pretty
disposal
nice house to me. Probably a garbage disposal. That's right. By those standards, the standards that have been established, he's got this suburban middle class lifestyle going, but it's not enough for him. And suddenly, an opportunity for petite bourgeoisie, advancement. He's going to go from being a worker to being an owner of a small business, a silent partner, but he's going to be an owner, and he's going to jump at that, and he's going to, even use underhanded means to get to that. So he has that desire and capitalism always gives you that desire. We got to move up. It's not good enough where we are. We need more. We need bigger houses. We need more space. We need more material belongings. We can't just be workers. We have to be owners, blah, blah, blah. We can't just be the second chair. So there's that. And in Doris, you see that where, you get the sense that, first of all, she's such a sad person that even from when they first started dating, she was drinking, she was unhappy. But what she likes about being at Nerdlingers, the word itself it's like a single word joke. I laugh when I say that word. You see her with the fancy perfume. It gives her access to stockings. And the first time we see her, it's both meant to project something of her eroticism, but because she's in her underwear, but also she's like, stroking her undergarments, how like, just feel the, whatever it is, the silk or the manufacturer, the quality of the product. And oh my gosh, I got the fancy perfume with with a little press ball, on a little vaporizer ball. And she wants more. She wants Big Dave. She doesn't want just her boring man who wasn't there. She wants more. She wants bigger. She wants a bigger job. She wants more income. She too has this, endless desire that, capitalist microeconomics will tell us we want. They tell us, in economics that no matter how much you want more. There's always more utility to be gained by more. It's maybe diminishing marginal utility, but it's still not zero for most things. And that's what she wants. She wants more. And that, of course, leads in part to her downfall. Riedenschneider, which means vineyard cutter. He stays at the fanciest hotel, the Metropole. Sounds international, doesn't it? And in a suite that's named after an opera. An opera, by the way, about men who are being executed because of their desires for a woman. Turandot, or sometimes pronounced Turandot, Persian queen. But he wants what he orders, right? Nobody can eat all that. He orders he orders, steak and eggs and all kinds of things, and the whole menu practically. Then the last thing, in an homage to Big Lebowski and to Fargo, he says, "Flapjacks, baby. I want some flapjacks." He too, and he, he could, if he had cared about his client, he would have defended him after the mistrial. But no, he's not gonna. No money, no service. Sorry, off to the chair with you. And that's all he really cares about. So I think there's this critique that's going on of people in the United States at that time, and the emptiness of it, and the way that it continues to drive people onward to these empty, with these empty promises that even when you get them, she gets the perfume, she gets the undergarments, she gets, they're just not enough there. I think that the last thing I'd like to add to that is just that, there was all these references to some ethnicity. It's a very white world, first of all. So just by what's not there, something said there's not people of color, really. But there's, French, German, Japanese people, Italians, they all get mentioned. But I think there's a comment on our self-deception about this, because it's pervasive, but there seems to be also this sense that people know that it's fake on a certain level. I was kind of struck by the moments in the jury trial. I think there's a lot to be said about those trial scenes where the voiceover, Ed's voiceover, talks about, to convict him would be to convict themselves. And we never get a chance to hear whether they would convict or not, but there is this concern that they don't want to recognize what they have become, that this is a real risk and it continues to be, I think, in our political world, that on one level, Zizek is really good about this, and this the Dutch philosopher Peter Sloterdijk is good about this too. There's a sense of, on one level, we know that there's a lot of bullshit going on, and that these promises that are being made, this dream, this American dream is a dream. But on the other hand, we still continue to buy into it, and we can't think of otherwise. Even when they realize that things are going bad for them, I try to indicate that in the summary, their way out is still, they're confined to the possibilities that one of the things about these social structures, I think, is that they not only, arrange our material world with, neighborhoods and consumable goods and, cars and technology and all kinds of things. They also arrange our mind and what we think about ourselves, what we desire, what we think a good life is. And when we get into trouble, when things are not going well for us, how we think we can escape that. Ed talks in a certain about having discovered a secret, or feels like he discovered a secret that the rest of them don't know, something bigger than what happened to Big Dave. But has he? Because when they turn to things, it's still he's going to go and he's going to latch onto this rising star piano player. He still wants the recognition that he wants success on the terms that are being handed to him. There's nothing that's coming out of him authentically, I think. So I think there's a critique of our self-deception and our complicity, even when we try to escape these things. You see this. And I'll end with this, just saying that it's a commonplace when people say, Americans can imagine a zombie apocalypse, but they can't imagine socialism. We just are confined in what we can imagine and what can be a different world. So maybe if you forgive me one more last bit, it's the West. It's not just a suburban area, but it's the West. And this is a theme that comes up a lot in the Coen brothers. And we remember in The Big Lebowski how so much of it was about Westerns and about the West. And here, the West is suburbia. So these Anglos have conquered the continent. They've established their empire around the world. They've got the guns, the commercial power. And look at them, they're empty. This is a comment on the nihilism of American political and economic reality after World War II.
Yeah, Peter, some nice observations there. And there's some I do want to come back to. But a couple, I think, pretty brief things about social, political context and cinematic context, too. Because, of course, As is so often the case, but here maybe more overtly than sometimes, the Coens are playing with genre, and they're really doing a genre here. They're doing film noir. We've seen other films from them by this point in their career that are heavily influenced by noir. Blood Simple, most clearly. You can even call Blood Simple a noir. I think it's got enough of the elements and so on. But of course, it doesn't have that classic black and white look that they decide here to do. They give it the veneer. I mean, it's more of a veneer than a veneer. I mean, it goes all the way down, right? And they set it in the era. And so, even more than Blood Simple, and of course Fargo has elements of noir, and Lebowski has elements of noir, but this one is just sort of a full-on noir. Now they're still screwing around with it, of course. They still, they throw some UFOs in there, for instance. There's no UFOs in the classic American noirs or the French noirs or any of them, but so they're still having fun with it. They can't do a genre straight, or at least they never have, and they won't.
Yeah.
But nonetheless,
he's not a detective.
It's
Ed.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's an interesting question? Yeah, the relation of this to a detective story, because of course, and this goes back to Lebowski a little bit, where Lebowski's got a detective. He finds out the truth, but it turns out it doesn't matter that he finds out the truth because nobody believes him. Something like that is going on here too, where the truth does come up at times. Ed tries to tell Riedenschneider at one point what really happened. Hey, I killed him. Here's what happened.
I love that scene.
But he doesn't care. He's a lawyer. Right? He doesn't care that it's true, or he doesn't even really stop to think that might be true, I think, right? The truth has nothing for him. He just wants the good story again that he can sell.
Total sophist.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we need to talk more about that too. But this noir thing, noir is very, of course, interesting genre, and it comes largely out of German expressionism, and it became popular in part just for economic reasons because it was really cheap to make. Right? Because you could do a noir. And for instance, you didn't have to build a big set because you could keep a lot of the set in darkness and you can shoot in really small spaces and so on. So there's a lot of things lying behind, the ascendance of the noir. But of course, at the same time, as a genre, the film noir seems to embody and express this kind of cultural critique in itself. There's no such thing as a wholesome noir. There's no such thing as a noir that leaves you feeling good about the world and about society. It's always about corruption in some way. And it always, I think, suggests that even the main characters, even if they're heroic in some sense, have corrupt elements as well. There's a battle between good and evil, and the good and evil is almost always partly internal. It's not just out there. It's in the characters themselves, that they're fighting with themselves in some way. And all this gets expressed through this wonderful black and white photography and the chiaroscuro and all that, the shadows and so on. And so the Coens are replicating that visually, and they're also getting at those themes, and so it makes sense. And it's important that this film is set in the late 40s. That's kind of the time when this was becoming one of the major American film genres and really showing its influence, an influence that really continues to this day. The late 40s again, so, it's sort of the outset of the Cold War. Like you said, we have this immediate reference to the Russians having the bomb. It's an atmosphere of paranoia. There an awareness of secrets. The UFOs that keep coming into this film represent this idea of, there's secrets that the government knows that they're not sharing with the rest of us. And so Big Dave's wife turns up at one point to share the secret about his encounter with the UFO. This is what's really going on, and it's all going to come out.
Amazing scene.
Wonderful scene. She's incredible in that scene, of course. And so you've got this idea of kind of, truth again and knowledge as power, but the idea of what passes for truth, it is so often so flaky or weird. There's a link between this and kind of the atomic bomb, right? Another kind of secret weapon, as you mentioned, in the control of those in power. And Peter, I agree with you. I love it when Frank says here the Russians exploded an A-bomb. There's not a damn thing we can do about it. That's just such a great line. Well, of course there's not a damn thing. Why would you expect there would be something to do about it? I love that. So the film, of course, takes place, 4 years after the use of the atomic bomb in war against Japan, which Ed recalls at one point and recalls it almost casually. Or he mentions the bombing of Nagasaki, it just as part of a list of various things that he's lost or that are going away. I think as part of the context, the social context, we should mention the fairly frequent use of racial and homophobic epithets by the characters. There's this kind of casual racism, for instance, directed towards groups like the Japanese, and as well as Italian immigrants. And then there's an equally casual and completely taken for granted homophobia that gets expressed in words like pansy, which is used about Creighton Tolliver, because he does appear to make a pass at Ed Crane at one point. And when the characters use these terms, it's not with any degree of self-awareness. It's not ironically or anything like that. This is just how they talk. And, this is how they think. This is the culture of the time. And again, connecting with that sort of paranoia and, as one of you mentioned earlier, the fear of the alien. And I love the way that the UFOs, that meaning of the word alien comes to also be symbolic and representative of this other idea of alienness that Americans are afraid of at the time. And of course, very much still afraid of now. So you've got World War II in the very recent past, and this, of course, is very significant with respect to Big Dave, because, again, we are led to believe, he tells everybody that he saw active combat in the war, and he tells these entertaining and somewhat macabre stories about cannibalism and this and that, the Arnie Bragg story and so on. And, of course, all this turns out to be lies. He made it all up, so he's got this idea of this constructed masculinity that he's made up for himself because he apparently is not content with and probably somewhat ashamed of the actual story of what he did during the war. And then I think we should at least mention, and these aren't just social cultural themes, I think we'll talk about them more with when we come to philosophical and so on, and they've already been mentioned, I think freedom, always in connection with Coen films, and alienation. And I think it is worth mentioning them here just because there are specific forms of freedom or lack of freedom and specific forms of alienation that raise particular issues in this particular sociocultural setting. I mean, in American culture around this time, starting, I think, in the late 40s and then through the 50s and 60s, there's so much talk among intellectuals about the idea of alienation, which, it's kind of a Marxist idea, but then it comes up and gets applied to all sorts of things, gets connected with ideas about worries about conformity and conformism, and we've certainly we look at modern life as depicted in this film. And this connects, I think, Peter, with some of the stuff you said about consumerism and so on. There's just this idea of conformity that's been driven by big corporations and driven to some degree by government. And they need all Americans to be living the same sort of life so that they can all do the same things, behave predictably, be controlled and influenced by the same products, and so on. And on some level, as you say, these characters who may think of themselves to some degree as individuals, it's really questionable how much they really are individuals or how successful they could possibly be in asserting their individuality when so much of their identity seems to be formed by those sorts of economic and forces and advertising and so on. I mean, you think about what Ed Crane is willing to do to get this money, and then you ask, well, wait, why does he even need the money? What's it for? I mean, what does Ed Crane care about? What does he do? What is he going to do with that money? The only thing I can think of two things, I guess. He might buy nice things for his wife. That's one. But he doesn't need that much money to do that, and they already kind of have it made, as we've said. Or maybe he's going to stop working because he doesn't like being a barber. But actually, I don't think he minds it. And what's he going to do if he stops? He doesn't seem to do anything else. So I don't even really know what the money is for. And I think, Peter, this connects with your point about the emptiness of desire. I don't think Ed Crane tries to get money because he has a plan for that money. I think it's just a given in that culture at that time that you try to get money. That's what you do. That's the point of your life. And you try to get more money. And if you have some money, how much money do you need? Twice as much as you have right now would be good, right? Something like that. So, yeah, I think that there's this
it's also he wants to stop being a worker and becoming an owner.
That's true. On some level, that's probably right. The idea of being a businessman, yeah. And the nature of the business doesn't even matter. He's going to be a silent partner. He's not going to be involved in it. He'll be alienated from that too, right?
Yeah.
But you're right.
Of course he's a silent partner.
You're right. He's going to change class, from being employed to being the employer. And that does seem like a be-all and end-all, I think, for that sort of mindset we're talking about. So that's probably more to say about freedom, especially in connection with the idea of prisons. But I think I can leave that we'll come back to that. So I think for now, that's probably what I'll say about sociocultural themes. I'll pass it over to Robert.
Nice, Troy. Yeah, you said a lot of things, really insightful things, and some things I want to pick up on that I had in my notes as well. So I was thinking about, 1950 was the day the Earth stood still came out, and around the same time the movie The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I think that kind of paranoia, of course, we look in retrospect, it's easy to see that's kind of a Cold War era of paranoia or anxiety about America, about perhaps America's crumbling American dream, which would, when Frank says, there's nothing we can do about it. It's, of course, he's explicitly talking about the Russians and the bomb, but he also could be talking about this idea that the country is changing. As I said before, it's 1949. It's on the precipice. The Frank Capra world is going away in the 1950s, heading into the 60s. So I can see this, the Coens, as you mentioned earlier in your comments about the significance of noir to the social and political aspects, but the paranoia, because I was wondering, we all wonder, like, what the hell, what's with the UFOs and the flying saucers, which are ubiquitous throughout the film. And I think one of the things that captures the classic film noir can capture this feeling that that things are much darker than, like I said, it's not Frank Capra's world. It's a darker world. It's these sort of sublimated desires of lust and murder and these things come out. But what a film noir often misses, and I think what the Coens are doing with the UFO, is to capture not only that film noir feel, but also the paranoia. And it's very effective to use UFOs. And I think they're also making a meta commentary, because the UFO is a reflection of the Red Scare. And now the Coens are saying, to me, what I'm seeing them do is say, we want to inject that feeling of fear, of the paranoia. And so what's a cool way to do that? Well, it's 1949. What the hell? Let's put that aspect. That's, like I said, if you watch The Day the Earth Stood Still, all of Washington is worried. Who is the actual alien? Of course, Michael Rennie shows up as this guy, John Carpenter, and I can't remember John, but his name's Carpenter. And, he's the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet, but he has dinner with the family, and the whole talk of the dinner is, who's the alien? Is there an alien, right? And I think that kind of paranoia is captured so well by this. I mean, it's not the only thing you can way to interpret the UFO, but I wanted to dovetail on what you were saying about the importance of the context of the film noir in relation to the social and political era of the time. And then with something else I wanted to say, that touching on what you were talking about with regard to Ed's wanting to be the barber who wants to be a dry cleaner. And I want to just reiterate, I think Peter put his finger on it. It's this petite bourgeoisie thing, which is that, and this to a larger theme that I wanted to talk about, which is the class issues that are talked about in the film, right? There's clear class issues. I think part of the reason why Ed feels bad is because he is a second chair. He's the second chair barber. Frank is the owner. We see this when they go to the bank, right? And the assistant guy comes out and says, "Are you ready to come in?" And he goes, "Can my brother-in-law come in?" And he does this kind of, it's very humiliating. Well, who's he? Well, is he an owner? No, he's family. So, he's second chair barber. And then the guy says, "No, I think he should stay." And it's really humiliating for Ed, because this sort of exemplifies this thing, Peter, you're talking about, is if I were the owner, if I were in the petite bourgeoisie, then I would be a man. Then I would be someone. And they talk about these class issues throughout the film. What's interesting is the only one who really who validates Ed is the cousin, the Italian immigrant cousin at the wedding, when she said, right? She goes, "Hey, and you mentioned this, I think, Peter. What did she say? It's a decent trade, or it's a decent trade. It's a decent trade, right? So that's the only confirmation he gets, validation he gets. And so I do think that going back to your question, Troy, about like, why does he need the money? I think he doesn't. It's not about the money. It's about transcending social class. And as you mentioned, and I'll go back to this too, you touched on a lot of points, is there's rampant, it's inveterate racism. It's invisible. It's, it's what the, unconscious bias, we call it, as, they say these days. So it's rampant, of course, throughout the film, and it's presented in a way, as you point out, Troy, the viewer to say, wow, this is the culture. No one's even stopping to point it out, because they don't even notice it themselves. And I do think the things with race and class, there is this struggle to be more than what you are. And again, it can go back to this question of the ideology and what we're fed, right?
Just extend. I mean, those are great insights, Robert. I really appreciate that, especially making the class and racial ethnic stuff explicit. I had two things to extend it with. One was about ownership. Even Big Dave, one of the reasons we find out he wants that annex is because he says once he's tearfully must have been really humiliating for him to cry in front of Ed that way, saying like, I'm embezzling from my wife. He said, I serve at the pleasure of the ownership.
Right.
I serve at the pleasure of the ownership. He's not the owner. He's subordinated to his wife's family, who really own the thing. And that's one of the things he's trying to claw out from under themselves. As far as the money goes, it does reinscribe what I was saying about the imagination. Like for Ed, he's discontented, but what are the possibilities for him? That's all he can think to do is to become a business owner, because that's going to be the way. And think how common that still is. About the spaceship, I love your reading of that, by the way, with the anxiety and that's just that. I mean, so many of those 1950s horror films are about anxiety about communism. It's the body snatchers and the giant spiders and all this. But I think you kind of pointed to it when you talked about transcendence. I think the spaceship is a sort of metaphor for transcendence for Ed, because I love the scene where it's his dream where everybody's gone out of the prison. There's a big light. He follows the light. There's the spaceship up in the sky where otherwise maybe the moon or something would be. And what's it doing there? It's got its light on him, as he's standing in that door. But then it kind of wavers and signals it's going. It's going to leave him. He's not going to get pulled up into the spaceship. There is no transcendence for him. He's not going to get elevated out of the prison. He's going to stay in that prison, and he's going to suffer, that world. And so he nods. He's like, gives an acknowledgement. Yeah, okay, fellas, on your way. There might have been a moment of hope for him that he might have been taken, but no, he's not going to be taken. And so I saw that as a kind of symbol of his dashed hope, that he had some kind of bizarre, empty hope. Even that, like transcendence can't, what do you turn to for transcendence? People will turn to drugs, they'll turn to religion, they'll turn to like the idea of being, going to Mars and starting colonies, some shit like that. It's just wacky. But it's the symptoms of an empty mind that can't really think about how to transcend the alienation of that point of American culture. So anyway, that's how I'd add to it. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned religion, just because the only explicit reference, I think, to religion in this film, of course, is the scene where they go to church and they don't go to worship, they go to play bingo. This is very much a world without religion. This culture, just has none. And yeah, I think that one of the roles that the UFOs play, you're right. There's clearly, there's the side that is frightening and the paranoia, et cetera, and the unknown. But there's also this thought that they're substitute gods in a way, and maybe they're going to save us. And you see this in some of the science fiction films of the time. And of course, I think it's in the 60s or the 70s that you get probably the 70s, you get that very popular series of books with titles like Chariots of the Gods, right, and stuff like that. So there is this element of the popular imagination, yes, exactly, that is looking at UFOs and thinking, they're going to come save us, because clearly we're not going to save ourselves. And I think you're right. Ed feels some of that. He's casting about for something to come save him, because he doesn't know what to call out to.
The ending a little bit either pathetic or just bizarre. Like all of a sudden he's thinking of an afterlife. I'm like, afterlife? What the fuck? Where'd that come from?
It's funny. I didn't read the scene, his dream with the UFO. I read it differently than you, because I didn't see him as placing hope for escape or transcendence. I felt like the light, there's a Platonic reference that I'll come back to as well, but I think when the UFO, when the light turns off and it flies away, I saw in Ed a certain resignation or a certain acceptance, but not a dashing. Like it when he after that scene when he goes to his death, and he's talking, as you mentioned, he's talking, it's the first time in the film. It's very un-Ed when he says, "Oh yeah, I hope I can share with Doris things that we don't have words for." When I watched that, I thought, wow, there was a moment of transcendence. That is not the Ed that we saw throughout the entire film. So the UFO, the light, and then he's able to create the narrative. And again, we'll come back to this in the philosophical parts with regard to the notions of existentialism and absurdity.
I love what you said about language.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, quickly, he's able to create a narrative of his life instead of being in the maze where you hit the point and he talks about you're just basically walking around. He takes that maze and he creates meaning. At least that's what I saw. So
yeah, we got to talk about language later. That's a huge thing. And the silence. It was just that because of the bars, the doors open. That's what would think for me, like locked. Yeah. He's in a cage and the doors open. But I agree with you that it's not. It doesn't seem like exactly he's dashed at the end. There's a kind of fatalism almost. He's like accepted it. Like, oh yeah, you're going. Okay, salute. On your way.
I wanted to just bring up a couple more social political things. And Troy, I forgot to mention when you were talking about the importance of noir, and the reason why I didn't really get to flesh out at all why I say it's a meta noir rather than a neo noir is because when I think of neo noir, a classic neo noir for me is Elliot Gould. The Long Goodbye. The Long Goodbye. It's partially about noir films, but it's a neo-noir film, right? And certainly The Man Who Wasn't There is not a neo-noir film in that sense, because like the Coen brothers love to do, they're playing with the genre, right? And they're not as... When you watch The Long Goodbye now, it's a great film. It holds up. It's from 1973, I believe. But it's earnest. It's like they're actually trying to make a 1970s version of a film noir. But... the Coens are they ever really earnest? No, there's always the meta level. So I wanted to, and that's something, this is, the film comes out in 2001, so there's issues about, even Y2K issues going around. But I want to go back to something else, and that is one of my other political, social, cultural themes is the post-war notion of manhood. Are starting they're starting to disintegrate. There is the guys who were served in the war. As Dave, what's interesting is from my perspective, when Ed says, well, he doesn't say, Doris mockingly says that Ed couldn't serve because he's 4F, and I would be thinking, oh, that's cool, you got to get out of it. But I forgot that mindset of macho is like, oh, that must have been really tough that you actually had to stay and you couldn't fight, which I thought. So thinking about the post-war notion of manhood as disintegrating, I was thinking of Doris as representing a kind of post-Rosie the Riveter, pre-sexual revolution feminist, right? One thing about Doris, and this goes to our aspirations, and I want to talk about at some point in our discussion, how everyone in the film is deceptive in some way, self-deceptive, other deceptive. But Doris, what's interesting, and Troy and I were talking about this, she's a self-loathing Italian immigrant, or second generation Italian. So she doesn't want to be Italian. She wants to aspire. Everyone's aspiring. She's aspiring to be an upper middle class, rejecting tradition. She doesn't go to church. Who ever heard of an Italian who's not Catholic who doesn't go to church? She doesn't go to church. She aspires to have a more sophisticated sort of urban, life. And she is, she's threatening to the male narrative of the World War II era. And I think this is also tied into a kind of fear of modernity. And we learn from Regenschneider, he says, Ed is the modern man, right? He points to, he's the future. And the future for men is going to bring, a kind of failure and frustration that we'll see we saw in the Big Lebowski. Dry cleaning. It's the modern way to clean, right? This leads to Ed's downfall. The future, this rejection of his grasping for what it is to be a man. Notice he rejects the new music. He embraces Beethoven, right? And then he's shocked at Bertie's, sexual bravado. So I'm thinking that, this women's, 1960, the pill is released. So this third wave feminism, this is threatening to the idea of the concept of this kind of masculinity. And so I think part of what we're seeing is the shift or the struggle, again, in The Big Lebowski, the struggle with what it is to be a man and what these notions of manhood are and what roles do women play and what counts as power. The idea that we could see Birdie as being sexually liberated in 1949, but I think we're meant to be disappointed because we hold Birdie in this. She's a good, even her dad's, she's such a good kid. Well, good, what does that mean? Well, she's chaste and she does all her homework and she gets A's and all that. But I guess now that she's sexually liberated, she's not good anymore. So I think that there are issues of manhood and women's power and women's sexuality, not only in this film, in many of the Coen brothers films.
And isn't it interesting on this topic that you have these two men, sort of the two main male figures in the film in some ways, Big Dave and Ed, both of whom were unable to take part in the war and sort of prove their manhood that way, who end up fighting first over a woman, in a sense at least, and then second coming to blows physically. And obviously, there's rage behind it, there's various things behind that fight, but in part, you just can't help but think, look, this is just two insecure guys both trying to prove that they're really a man, and that's what this fight is partly about.
Well, if there's no more comments, shall we move into the philosophical themes? Boy, oh boy. Now, Peter, do you want to start us off with some of your insights?
Okay. I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot in this film. And this film just keeps on paying off that way, by the way. I do have to maybe start with just a dumb little allusion. I wondered if you heard in it too, because, we know that Ethan was a philosophy major, and a famous, a paradox is called the Barber's paradox that Bertrand Russell formulated. You think that could be in that? I don't know.
Yeah, Troy and I were talking about that the other night because we watched them film.
What'd you think? What'd you decide?
Well, I don't think I just said something like, Troy, do you think that's not an accident that he said? He didn't say the Barber's paradox. What did he say? The Barber dilemma?
The Barber's dilemma at some point, yes.
And
yeah.
I think we looked at each other
dilemma,
and said, knowing the Coen brothers, that is not an accident.
No, it feels like it's there on purpose. The paradox is, it ends up both being, what is it? If the barber shaves himself, he doesn't shave himself.
There's a barber in a town who shaves all those except those who shave themselves, and then the question is, who shaves the barber or something like that.
Right? Yes, that's it exactly. Who shaves the barber?
I don't think that it's. I mean, of course, given the final scene, I don't think that it's a coincidence that they talk about the paradox.
So there are two moments with shaving in it, and one is that I think are connected. One is when Doris is in the tub, and she says to Ed, "Come shave my leg," and he does, and it's very sexually voluptuous, and
it's sort of as close to intimacy as they get, isn't it? Yeah, that scene.
That's right. When is that? And then it's repeated when his calf is shaved just before he's electrocuted.
Yeah,
and you're thinking to yourself, is it the way I read that was that Doris is about to be electrocuted too. I mean, in a different way, because she's off on a course of events that will lead ultimately to her death.
Interesting. So he is more or less shaved by his executioners, but of course she was also being shaved by the person who turned out to be, in essence, her executioner.
His executioner.
Nice.
Right.
Nice. I love it.
So anyway,
I mean, the Coens set up a lot of things, I think, as little images and stuff that they then bring back in the final few shots of the film. And I think it's wonderful how they do that. It helps make those shots so resonant. And that's really one of the striking ones. Yeah, the scene of him having his leg shaved in that way.
Yeah, they zero in on his calf as it's being shaved. Yeah, that's just not an accident, And the way Ed looks at it, too, in this kind of bemused way, I couldn't help but think.
And, of course, he's sitting in the chair with the electric chair, which looks like a barber's chair. I mean, all of these images are just flooding back all of a sudden. It's like he's been reliving this moment his whole life and rehearsing it, and now it's the real thing.
So some of the themes that was skepticism, of course, existentialism, masculinity, which has been talked about, nihilism, language and silence. I'm going to start there because I think that's just I mean, we really have to talk about existentialism and the other things too. But I was just, intrigued, first of all, just watching. Let's just start by saying that Billy Bob Thornton, he's a guy of a few words, which he says, but of course the whole thing is narrated by him. And so like what we're experiencing are his words. I mean, this is his story. This is his narrative. This is his logos of the events. And, that's explained to us at the end very clearly. But he's quiet. And when he makes that remark about speaking to Doris in ways that he says,
yeah, I'll tell her the things they don't have words for here. Yeah.
I mean, that's been a long time sort of philosophical interest of mine, going all the way back to like, Wittgenstein's thing about like what we, can't speak about, we have to pass over in silence. So, but it's also, I think, if you ever read Julia Kristeva's book, Black Sun, it's about suicide. And one of the things she argues for there, and I pick up on this, I have an essay on this military guy, Ted Westhuizen, Colonel Ted Westhuizen, who killed himself too. And I think about suicide as an attempt to say things that can't be said in a culture at a certain time anyway. And I felt like, Ed is in that predicament. He's in the condition of someone like Ted Westhuizen, or the people that Kristeva talks about, in that he wants to be able to say things that will bring him into the world. I mean, this idea of being able to speak in the world is so important in both the law and in philosophy. I mean, you talk about somebody like Martin Heidegger. I mean, he famously says, language is the house of being, and it's certainly that house that we inhabit as we, try to deal with being and try to deal with reality. And that's often in courtrooms, what we assert, what words are said, whether they can create reasonable doubt or eliminate reasonable doubt, or create understanding. I mean, it connects back to, for me here, the theme of skepticism too, because there's so many times. I mean, first of all, in that case, he says, I'll be able to, maybe when I get over across to the other world, whatever, things will be clear that are vague to me now, or that I don't understand now. Let me see if I wrote that down. He says, maybe things I don't understand will be clearer there, like a fog that blows away. And I often use that metaphor, the epistemic fog. It's sort of like the human condition, that we live in this epistemic fog. That great movie, Insomnia, the Swedish detective film, it's remade with Robin Williams and Al Pacino. Great about the epistemic fog and the human condition. But, we hear over and over again, like in the ransom note, he says, I know about you and Doris Crane. Cooperate or Ed Crane will know. Your wife will know. Everyone will know. That's what the threat. The note threatens knowledge. But when he's on the chair, it's not about knowledge that he's interested in. He's interested in maybe acquiring some kind of maybe knowledge or something, but that he doesn't have in this life. So I feel like that his silence isn't just about a character trait. It's about him being unable to use language to place himself in the world in a meaningful way. That's why I loved what you said, Robert, about he is spinning out meaning at the end, in this narrative. But doesn't he also sort of suggest that he's still frustrated? He's hoping. He still has this weird, vain, bizarre hope that once he's dead, it'll become clear to him. Things will become clear to him that aren't clear now, and that he can speak to Doris in ways that he couldn't speak to her in the life that they were leading, in all the terms of culture and society and expectation and custom, etc., that had prevented him. Because then, of course, the question arises: why can't he speak? Why can't he put things into words? Why aren't things clear to him? So, anyway, I wanted to say that about language and silence. I think that's a key theme philosophically in the film. By the way, Ethan wrote his senior thesis on Wittgenstein. So
yes.
Clearly,
there
what
you
can
go.
be said and what can't be said. So yeah,
there you have it. No, I think that's really true. This theme of knowledge as power, and I love that. I hadn't thought of that. You pointing out in the ransom or the blackmail note of knowledge as threat. People will know. I'll let this knowledge out of the bag. I'll expose the secret. And the film is so full of secrets. And Ed Crane, in a way, has And this really becomes clear at the end, I think, finally, that he is questing after knowledge. He wants to understand things, which hadn't been clear to us, I think, until that point. But he has this kind of faith in knowledge and a value he puts on it. And for me, again, one of the great moments where that you really see that in action is when he tries to give knowledge to Freddie Riedenschneider. He said, look, here's what really happened. And it goes nowhere. Yeah. He isn't heard. He puts knowledge out there into the world. He puts truth out. And it's treated just as another bullshit sentence, like any other one. And he's so disappointed, I think, at that moment.
Such a great moment.
It is. It's a key moment, for the film, for sure, and for his character.
And I think Peter mentioned the word sophistry earlier, because Riedenschneider is sort of the epitome of a sophist, right? All he cares about, as you mentioned, is the story and the narrative and the persuasion. That's all he's interested in. So he doesn't. The notion of truth, and that goes to some other themes we can talk about philosophically that I have notes on, which is, the role that truth plays and deception plays in the film, and who's deceived and who's the deceiver. But we'll come back to that in a minute. I don't want to, Peter, if you had more to say, I don't want to cut off your
And maybe just this will maybe be a segue into what you're talking about, nihilism. I love the line when Ed is sort of musing about Riedenschneider's remark that he said he told them to look at the facts and then at the meaning of the facts. And then he said the facts had no meaning. I love that. And so, that's a great statement of nihilism there, of course, but it's also this idea that, that there's something more than just, stating the facts, but there's meanings that go along with it. And that's what's slipping for him. Even like, there's that famous moment in Sartre's novel Nausea at the chestnut tree where he's looking at the roots and all of a sudden they're just not making any sense to them. And like, what are these roots? I think of there's a great musical moment. I love it in what's her name? Laurie Anderson's album. It's called Sharky's Day. But anyway, she talks about this empty room and the pencil erasers, and it all just looking at the brute facticity of all these material objects. It just seems senseless. And he's into it when he's looking at the hair. Yes. It grows out of our head. It just keeps coming and coming. Then we just throw it away. He's become alienated, from the meaning of facts, and he's at a loss to the meaning of the world. But when Riedenschneider says that, it resonates with him because he's like, that's right. He said he'd even got going with him because that's the condition he's suffering, I think. I think that's right. You're so right about that. That moment with the hair, first of all, where he has a real direct confrontation with reality and he can't put it in a category. He can't make sense of it. It just is what it is. And what do you do with that? And yet there's also these moments in the film, very interesting and puzzling moments, like after he first goes to see Doris in prison and then he's looking at the people in the street and he says, there they all are going about their daily business. But I felt like I had learned a secret, right? Peter, I think you mentioned this one earlier, right? That a secret even bigger than what happened to Big Dave. Like, I know something now that I've been to prison, now that I've seen that. And it's not clear exactly what he means, but because, again, he doesn't have words for it, right? There are no words for it here. But he now takes himself to know something that he never knew before and that these poor ordinary schlubs in the street just have no idea about. Kind of Wittgensteinian, like something's been shown that couldn't be said.
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know.
Right.
On my read of it, the philosophical theme that stands out the most to me is this notion of the existentialist notion of the absurd. I was looking at the myth of Sisyphus, and Troy, I know that you were reading The Stranger. You were looking. Do you want to talk about The Stranger?
Yeah, I'd hoped to reread the entire Camus novel, The Stranger, because it's short. But even though it's short, I didn't make it all the way through, unfortunately.
But the character is named Meursault.
Meursault. A lot of clear similarities between Meursault and Ed Crane, and a lot of similarities between, particularly the trial scenes. So and some of the prison stuff for sure.
I was looking at the myth of Sisyphus again. Here's a quote that just to focus on the notion of the absurd and then to tie it into this question of truth and knowledge and deception. And that is, he says, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. And I think that captures a lot of what we're experiencing through Ed. I think Ed's, so this is going to connect to what happens when he's having that kind of epiphany, or he gains some kind of knowledge. So Riedenschneider says, to reiterate what you said earlier, he says, we can't really know what happened because the more you look, the less you really know. It's a fact. It's a proved fact. In fact, it's the only fact there is.
The only one.
The only fact there is that the more you look, the less you know. And Ed is, if nothing else, he's very observant. He's quiet. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Is he really quiet? That's a question. So he observes things. And so you get this theme. The Coen brothers love this theme. They come back to it, and we talked many times about nihilism and the absurd. And I was thinking that, well, the old existentialist saw, if you will, essence precedes existence, except for humans, right? Existence precedes essence. And I was thinking, well, Ed never really has an essence. I mean, towards the end of the film, he barely creates one for himself. But as Peter pointed out, there are things his quote essence are framed for him in terms of what he is not, right? So he's not like the Ubermensch. It's like, this is what I am. I'm a barber. No, he's always he's unclear on it. So and this ties into which I want to talk about eventually, is the meaning of the film's title. But he does reinvent himself towards the end of the film. But let me go to this question of what's going on. So I want to read that scene. He says, "There they were, all going about their business. It seemed like I knew a secret, a bigger one even than what had really happened to Big Dave, something none of them knew. Like I had made it to the outside somehow, and they were all struggling way down below." Now, to me, again, Ethan was a philosophy major. We're talking about Plato's cave allegory, but I think we're talking about Plato's cave allegory. At least this is my read on it, in a kind of existentialist, almost Nietzschean way to think about it. So, the traditional story of the allegory of the cave is that we are the realm of the shadows and the images is the world we live in, right? And every once in a while, a particular heroic, great-souled person, for example, Socrates, can struggle and claw and climb his way out of the cave. And then when you get out of the cave, the sun is very bright. You can hardly see. Very bright light, very similar to the UFO. And so, but you can reach truth with a capital T. You can gain knowledge with a capital K. And I think from my reading of Nietzsche back in the grad school days, I think Nietzsche says something like this, the deceit, if you will, in Plato's cave allegory is that Plato claims that, the climb is arduous, but the reward is truth and knowledge of reality, not the life of shadows. But according to Nietzsche, at least, in my little, I'm not an expert, but the climb really never results in gaining truth at all, but rather in the realization that there is no truth, that it's folly, this picture that Plato paints for us. It's Sisyphus, right? All the way down. It's Sisyphus all the way down. So I was reading that philosophically as the thing that Ed, when he's making this reference about they're all down there struggling and I made it to the outside, is his realization that the world is absurd. This notion of absurdity that Camus talks about, confronting the world, the indifferent world to your aspirations and desires and desires for reason and meaning, that itself is a certain kind of realization or, quote, transcendence. So that's how I was reading that. And that's what I believe is one of the central themes of this film, is this notion of the absurd. And, it's very Coen brothers. This nihilism, as we've talked about many times, is at the center of, I think, this film and many of their other films. And that's where I see Ed. His journey is and of course when he's showing the people, when they're showing the people he's looking at, they're all like middle-class white people in this small town in California, and Peter, as you've pointed out, and that represents a kind of, the crowd, the sort of like the proletariat, or if you will, and so now we get this moment of realization, but again, it's not the realization of enlightenment; it's the realization of dread and of absurdity. Anyway,
well, it is a kind of enlightenment, and it's Socratic wisdom, isn't it? It's the only possible wisdom, which is knowing what we don't know. So I think it's a genuine kind of enlightenment. And so maybe in these moments, at least, Ed is freed from the sort of artificial desire and meaningless pursuit and so on that everybody else is trapped in, because he sees that it's bullshit and he sees his way around it. And I certainly think you're right. This is so pervasive in Coen films that these are films that are so often about how do we live in a world that really, at a deep level, doesn't make sense. And clearly this one is about that, because clearly that's the world it's set in. I do think it's very interesting, and I don't know quite what to make of this, that he begins the film again by saying that he never thought of himself as the barber. Yeah, I worked in a barber shop. I cut the hair, but I didn't think of myself as a barber. But at the end, he does seem to kind of have accepted that role in a way, because he says at one point, they asked me if I regret anything. I don't regret anything. I used to regret being the barber, he says, which implies clearly that he doesn't anymore. Now, I don't know if that means he fully accepts being the barber, but at the very least, he seems closer to inhabiting that role in an authentic way. And I'm not sure exactly what's going on. It makes me think of the whole Sartre example, the bad faith example, right, of the waiter playing at being a waiter. Is Ed Crane just playing at being a barber through most of this film, but he's not actually a barber? And then at the end, he becomes one.
Absolutely.
It would be wonderfully ironic if he sort of truly becomes a barber after he's done cutting hair, because he's in prison. He's not cutting hair anymore. But now he's really the barber because he doesn't regret it anymore, right? And one more thing, Robert, I love this. I love the Plato reading or the Plato connection. I fully buy it, but I want to make a different connection, which I think takes that moment in a different direction. And so again, it's the moment of him saying, like I had made it to the outside somehow, and all these people were struggling way down below. It fascinates me, first of all, that he says this after he's been to prison. Now, he hasn't himself been in prison yet, because it's Doris who is in prison. He just goes to visit her. But nonetheless, it seems like going to prison somehow is the instigating incident for this realization. And so being inside prison somehow means going outside. It's like I had made it to the outside somehow. And when I read this, it was bothering me. It reminded me of something. And I finally realized it reminds me of a moment in Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, which, of course, famous classic essay about Thoreau's night in jail. He refuses to pay the poll tax because he doesn't agree with some of the stuff the money would go to. He objects to slavery. He objects to the war on Mexico. He thinks they're both evil. He doesn't want to be complicit in that stuff. He not just doesn't want to be. He feels like he can't be, right? So he refuses on principle to pay tax, and they throw him in jail for one night, and then somebody pays it for him. And after he comes out, he writes this, and I'm going to skip a little bit in the middle, but he says, "When I came out of prison, for someone interfered and paid the tax. I did not perceive that great changes had taken place on the common, such as he observed who went in a youth and emerged a gray-headed man. And yet a change had come to my eyes over the scene, the town and state and country, greater than any that mere time could effect. I saw yet more distinctly the state in which I lived." And state is capitalized. He means the state as in, right, the political community and authority. "I saw yet more distinctly the state in which I lived. I saw to what extent the people among whom I lived could be trusted as good neighbors and friends, that their friendship was for summer weather only." And I'll skip a bit here. "This may be to judge my neighbors too harshly, for I believe that most of them are not even aware that they have such an institution as the jail in their village." So this to me really sounds reminiscent on some level of what Ed Crane is saying as well. He has had this realization by going to prison. Again, he hasn't even been there himself, but he will be soon enough. But it has shown him, oh, I had these people all wrong. I had this country all wrong. I had this society all wrong. Now I see what it's really about. Now I see that what it's really about is taking away people's freedom. Now I see that there is this violence at the heart of it, and that it's oppressing us in this way, and that the threat of prison is always there, even for people who haven't done anything wrong, like Doris. And so for me, part of the realization here is potentially this kind of political realization. But that said, I think there's also clearly a level on which it's the kind of philosophical realization that you're talking about, in connection with Plato and in connection with the existentialist, the facing of the absurd and all that. And I think it's part of the genius of the Coen brothers that they sort of get at all of that with such amazing economy, that it's all sort of folded into this one, fascinating little moment.
I'd love to both affirm your brilliant readings and maybe challenge them a little bit. I love the Plato reading here, but here's what I wanted to add. So you're right, Troy. First of all, I'd say the light. When you come out of the cave, there's the sun, and the spaceship does have that kind of bright light quality there too. But I think it gets thwarted because he doesn't escape prison, right? It doesn't release him. And so there's this kind of anti Plato kind of thing there. Even having seen the light, he's still going to the chair. He's not getting out of there. As far as his visit to Doris goes, I think it's really interesting. I love how you connect that, Troy. There are a few things, however, that happen right in between the reflections on hoi polloi and him being in on a secret and his visit, and that is he goes to see Riedenschneider in the restaurant. That's where you get the big restaurant discussion, and they go to the bank and they mortgage the business because Frank has declared he's got to think family must come together. This is when we come together, and we're going to sacrifice our property and in order to protect Doris. It's that moment where he feels like, oh, now I'm in on it. I feel like he's gotten something false, though. He thinks he's got a secret, but we find out later he's not. He's not got a secret at all. It was an illusion, and we see that because right after he had that reflection, the camera cuts to him being in bed later that night, and that's when Anne shows up and tells him a big secret, and one that makes her afraid too. I love her her bug eyes, and she's always furtively looking around like, who's watching? Is there anybody watching this? I think that tells us that you thought you were in on a secret, but there are much bigger secrets out there that you don't know about.
I agree with you, Peter, in a sense, that I don't think we know for sure or can be confident that he really does know a secret in this moment. And you're right, they stress the language of it. It seems like, it was like I had a secret or I knew a secret. But I do think that possibility is a real one. I think they want us to feel that maybe he's got a real insight here, but also maybe not. And that's part of the uncertainty that's so deep at the heart of this film, which, in which the uncertainty principle is invoked more than once. Wrongly, of course, as always, but nonetheless, it's invoked and it's important. And I don't think the fact that he doesn't escape prison at the end is really necessarily proof that he was never onto anything or something like that, because I think that there's a deeper way. There's a certain sort of existentialist. And I'm thinking about Camus and The Stranger here. I'm thinking about the very strange end of The Stranger, where presumably he gets executed. He never gets out of prison. And yet, in some way, it seems like, but it's just very unclear what we're supposed to think. But there's this strong indication we're supposed to think he's come to a sense of peace and acceptance, and that it almost doesn't matter at this point what happens to him, because, he has accepted the absurd. He has accepted the existentialist view that it doesn't really matter what happens. Whatever happens, it'll be your life. So the question is simply, do you live it authentically?
I agree, but isn't that not transcendent through knowledge? Like the model that
is a kind of knowledge. I mean, if they're right, if that's really how things are and how we should live, and that's really what authenticity is, that's a kind of knowledge. So it's maybe not the kind of transcendence some people would want.
Self-knowledge, yeah.
But we would be transcending that bad idea of transcendence, I think, in that case. So yeah. So I think that's maybe, but again, it's a suggestion that maybe that's what's happening, right? It's not clear to me we're supposed to think that. So.
And his response to the pregnancy is kind of like that, too. I mean, that's another bit of knowledge he doesn't have. Yeah. He doesn't seem to freak out when he learns about it.
It just is what it is. He the same way as when he sees the UFO at the end, he just nods, right? Oh, yeah, it is real. Okay. He is such a cool customer in a way. And I think one of the truly deep questions of the film that, again, it doesn't answer for us is his way of being which we can see as deeply existentialist in a way, or we could see as a kind of stoicism or whatever. There's various ways to conceptualize it, you know. Is it that he's lacking something? Is he deficient in some ways? Is he an incomplete person? Or is it in fact a kind of wisdom that helps him get through and endure anything, no matter what happens in his life? And that's a very deep question, I think.
Well, he's still longing for understanding at the end, though. You know.
Yeah, but that might be okay. That's not necessarily
maybe,
bad.
okay,
To me.
It came off as like corny to me. Like, really, now you're thinking you're gonna cross over and then you'll get your understanding.
I think he's wanted that understanding all along. He just hasn't articulated it before.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I wanted to jump in. I'm more congruent with Troy, your read on it when you said earlier when I was talking about my Plato theory, and you were saying, well, that is in a sense, it's a certain kind of enlightenment. The fact that you come to realize that there's no enlightenment or there's no transcendence. That kind of makes sense to me. I didn't put as much weight, Peter, as you did on the fact that he's still in prison. To me, he's metaphorically, he's been freed. He's free now to become a human, because he's not very human throughout the film. And when you read the Stranger, it's been a while, but Troy, you just looked at it. Isn't there a scene where like they tell him like his mother died or something, and he's like, is he indifferent?
That's the very beginning, yeah. And he barely responds. That's right.
It's almost like, oh yeah, things die, people die, and it strikes us as odd. And I get the same impression with Ed. There's a lot of things he does where I'm saying that's really weird. But Ed does reveal some feelings. For example, when he says, "Well, I think she was a lot closer to Big Dave," and that's sort of pinched. So he's trying to justify like I was a little bit hurt, right? And so I guess in the big picture, you know, he felt pinched. I felt pinched. I thought that was an uncharacteristically an un-Ed moment. But going back to this issue, Peter, you were raising about when he says, you don't have to tell me. When she's, you know, he, as you said, like she's on the precipice of saying, look, I'm having an affair or this. The way I read that was, it was that Ed is a particular kind of person, and there is a certain stoicism to this where what's the difference if I know this fact or not, right? What difference is it going to make? It is what it is. And so I saw that in some ways as a virtue of Ed. Not that I would say valorize, you know, not having emotional responses, but I saw Ed in those moments as having a certain kind of acceptance rather than saying, I want to hear from you. I want to hear it out of your mouth. I want to hear you say, I'm sleeping with Big Dave. He's not like that. My view is that if she's sleeping with Big Dave, she's sleeping with him. If she isn't, that's the way the world is. It's very stoic. So I think there is a little bit of a stoic philosophy in Ed. I'm not sure if he has it well worked out, but
it is very interesting. Just sort of a tangential note on that, but there's that moment, again, going back to the theme of knowledge, where they're talking about it with Freddie Riedenschneider, and they bring up the affair, and he says, how did you know about it? And Ed says, I know. I knew. A husband knows.
A husband knows. Yeah, a husband knows.
It's almost an un-Ed thing to say. You wouldn't expect that from him, and yet there it is.
Right.
Well, I wanted to bring up something, if we could, and it's related to all this stuff, and it was a couple of questions I had for you guys for us to chew on, and that is the question, what kind of man are you, is raised in the film, and of course it harkens back to other films like The Big Lebowski. And the other question I wanted to bounce off you guys to is, and this is related, what's the meaning of the film's title? And so let me say something about what kind of man you are. What kind of man are you? And then go to the other question with you guys. There's so many ways to read that question. And I don't know if you read, maybe because I'm so blind by my own heteronormativity, but when I started reading a little bit about a little analyses, various analyses of this film, it's a really common view that Ed is a closeted gay man. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess now rewatching it, but thinking about that in these contexts, what kind of man are you? So what is the word man? There's a sense in which man means, are you heterosexual, right? And there's a scene where at the party where some guy comes up to him and says literally, "Aren't you in ladies' wear? Aren't you in ladies' underwear?" Right? And of course, that has a double entendre if you're going to look through the lens of the homosexual analysis. But so it could mean, is he gay? Or it could mean, in what way are you a man vis-a-vis the traditional, as he says, what does he call the He-Man kind of view that Big Dave takes on? But then there's also the sense of man in like the person, right? Like, what kind of person are you? And are you like the rest of us? Because it seems like he's alienated from the rest of us. So what kind of man are you could mean in my reading is to say, like, are you one of us? Or are you an alien? Are you not man in the sense of person or even Homo sapien? Anyway, so what are your thoughts on that question? There's so much there, but there's a couple ideas that came to my mind.
I've heard the idea about him potentially being a closeted gay man, and I think it's an interesting possibility, though there's not much there to support it. I like it as just one possibility. Given the culture of the times and so on, it would make sense, that he would conceal that, given the stuff that happens with Creighton Tolliver. I do think that one line that you mentioned is, the "haven't I seen you in ladies' wear?" It is probably the biggest piece of evidence for it, but it's still a pretty small piece of evidence. It's funny, though. And his reaction, he does seem a little uncomfortable, but of course you probably would anyway. So, yeah.
I thought it was a moment of emasculation.
It definitely comes across, and that's an issue for Ed in some way. I mean, his masculinity is being challenged in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
The thing I noticed about that question, "What kind of man are you?" which obviously sounds like questions we've heard in other Coen Brothers films, in particular from Lebowski. What makes a man, Mr. Lebowski? And in that context, it goes on to be about ethics, allegedly, right? Doing the right thing, blah, blah. And here it's also posed in that way because both of the people who pose it to Ed are accusing him of something, of being a bad man. What kind of man would do this, right? What's wrong with you? So every time this question is posed, "What kind of man are you?" it's as an accusation, and it's as an attempt to categorize somebody. And every time it's followed by physical violence. Now, I say every time, it's only twice, but still, I think that's significant, that in the first case, Big Dave asks him, and then they end up fighting, and indeed to the death. And in the second case, Frank asks him and then punches him. And I think that's very interesting, in connection with this idea. Like, Ed clearly is in some way resistant to answering this question. He doesn't want to say what kind of man he is. He doesn't want to say that he's the barber. He is, there is some sort of reluctance on Ed's part. Now, how we understand this or interpret it, I think, is a big question, right? But in some way, I think we all have to agree there's some sort of reluctance on his part to affirm an identity and say, "This is who I am," right? That I'm going to place myself in a category. And, again, what that means, I don't know. I think it's very interesting, but it's a pretty deep fact about him. I mean, maybe that's really who Ed is. Who is Ed? He's the person who won't say who Ed is. And then maybe, and Robert, you said you were going to say something about the title of the film, and I certainly feel like that connects here. There's a sense in which, he's the man who isn't there. He's the man with no identity, in a sense. In one of the Sergio Leone Westerns, he'd be the man with no name, right? So, I mean, he's got a name, but it's hard to pin him down in terms of who or what he actually is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that, I have a less what do I want to say? Optimistic? I don't know. Reading of him, because I have my doubts that he's learned at the, had this kind of game at the end. And I also think that, it opens up by him saying, I work as a barber, but I never thought of myself that way. That he's unable to define a self in that world. It's part of the critique of that world. That's one reason he can't use language to establish himself in that place. I mean, there is, of course, to me, when I hear it, it reminds me of like Heidegger and Dasein, their being. And so but the way you are something in Dasein is through actions and words. And that, he certainly starts taking actions, I will say. So at the end, but of course the justice system hasn't identified those either. But so he's not been defined by society. He's not been defined by himself. I think he's not defined, and that's part of the critique, that he's a man. This world promises men a place. It promises, all kinds of people a place. But in this case, we're talking about a certain white man at a certain moment in history. But really, it doesn't. And I think that's what I take out of that. Yeah.
So I was thinking about the meaning of the film's title, and first let me just talk about the deception. So the entire film itself is Ed's story, right? So Ed is our extremely, I would say, unreliable narrator, right? The whole movie is coming from Ed's point of view. He's writing this article where he gets 5 cents a word, which is interesting. Suddenly he cares about, he really cares. He's going to make it, he even says like, it might be a little wordy because I'm getting paid for this. Well, he's on death row. He's caring about 5 cents a word. So there's something out of whack to begin with. He's got all these magazines around him, weird men's, some more of the question about his gayness. There's like a big muscly man magazine there. But so.
And he cares about the money even now.
He cares about the money in his, right? So, but, so first of all, when you see the final scene, at least when I see the final scene, I'm like, holy shit. How much of this even happened? How much of this is, what it reminded me of? What was that movie with Kevin Spacey? The Usual Suspects. You guys remember that movie?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Spoiler alert for listeners, the final scene is the detectives, looking around the room and realizing that this Kaiser Soze, I think was his name, he just invented from whole cloth this entire tale using all these things in the room. And so I had that effect on me where I was like, I can't rely on him for anything. So there's Ed as the deceiver. Doris is obviously the deceiver. She's deceiving Ed, and she's cooking the books. Big Dave of course is a deceiver. He's bullshitting about himself. So there's a lot of deception throughout the film. So now I was thinking about, this, I'm going to read this little blurb from the script, but this is, I think, hits on the point. He goes, when I walked home, it seemed like everyone avoided looking at me as if I'd caught some disease. And this is another kind of Camus reference, right? The plague. This thing with Doris, nobody wanted to talk about it. This is, of course, after she commits suicide, because she's pregnant, right? So we didn't even talk about that. But that's because when I first saw it, I'm like, why'd she commit suicide? Oh, yeah, God forbid she would come out and the truth would come out. It was like I was a ghost walking down the street. And when I got home now, the place felt empty. And then he says something really interesting. I sat in the house, but there was nobody there. I was a ghost. I didn't see anyone. No one saw me. I was the barber. Isn't it weird?
I love that scene.
No one is home. No one is there. So even when he's there, no one's there at the home, right? And I'm thinking perhaps the reason why Ed is not there is because we are witnessing an entirely fictional yarn that Ed is spinning. And in the story that he spins, Ed, the writer, is not in. We never witness Ed. That's why it's called The Man Who Wasn't There, is because he's not in the story. I mean, at least the real Ed is never in the story. It's Ed's confabulation of who Ed is. Anyway, that's my little little stab at trying to figure out.
That's amazing.
Pretty interesting.
I don't know. What do
and
you
it
guys
certainly
think?
fits with the Coen's obsession with stories and fiction and reliability and all this stuff that just keeps coming up in film after film for them.
I mean, and again, quickly, just I didn't mention, you can't not talk about Barton Fink too, right? The same, like Barton Fink, we watched and said, wait, how much of that took place in his mind, right? So it's a similar Barton Fink meets Usual Suspects. Well, anyway, guys, what do you say there's more to talk about that. What do you say we move on to Coen Brothers themes?
Well, I would say no, because I've got a philosophical theme to talk about.
Troy,
but it's
so
okay.
sorry.
No, it's also a Coen Brothers theme, so it's fine. So we can just do it under Coen Brothers themes.
Okay.
But it's something I've brought up briefly, but I want to say a little more about it because I think it's so fundamental to this film. In one way, I've touched on it at many points because it's about the absurdism again, right? The absurd universe. But I've said at some point in our previous podcast, maybe even a couple times, that you can divide Coen Brothers films into the ones that take place in a just universe where people get what they deserve and the ones that take place in an unjust universe. And nearly all of them fall into the latter category. The preceding film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? One of the very rare exceptions, right? And I think, in fact, there's some very interesting connections between these two films that I want to talk about. But on this matter, first of all, clearly an unjust universe in every sense, right? We have a world where there just are no reliable, logical, or ethical connections between actions and consequences. So we have Doris arrested for a murder she did not commit and dying as a result. And in fact, she hasn't committed any murder. This is very egregious. Doris, when she dies, is pregnant, but of course her husband is not the father. Ed ends up being arrested for a murder he did not commit. Now, he did commit a murder, but not the one he gets arrested for, and he's executed for that one. Big Dave commits a murder, the one that Ed ends up being arrested for, and he also dies violently, but his violent death is not a punishment for his crime, right? So if you think of the justice system as sort of having a couple big goals, one of them being to give people what they deserve and punish them according to their crimes, and the second one being to bring the truth to light, this justice system is just completely failing to do either of those things, right? Neither of those things are happening at all. And, you can read this as a critique of the actual justice system or something like that. And I think there's an element of that in there. But I also think that there's this broader philosophical idea, again, about this Coen-y skepticism about whether the world is a just place. We all know that people tend to believe that and love to believe that, right?
Yeah.
We hear it from everybody. There's a reason for everything that happens. There's karma. What goes around comes around. It'll get you in the end, whatever, right? It's just not true, right? If you look at the world and really pay attention, you know that it's just not true. And so then how do you live in a world, where it's not true? And one of the great things about this film is, first of all, through the plot, they really push that point by having so many instances of it. And then they give us this character, Freddie Riedenschneider, who is just sort of the king of this and sort of exults in it, right? He is the pure product of this justice system, the guy that makes it work and makes it run, the guy that loves it. When he learns, I love the idea that when he learns about the uncertainty principle, which again, he misunderstands, but that he loves it, right? He's like, oh, this is perfect. We can't know anything. That's like the biggest, most useful tool I've ever been given in my legal practice. I can get anybody off with this because I can convince the jury that they don't know anything because none of us know anything. And that's all I need, right? It's great. And then you have just these wonderful moments. We've already mentioned a couple. One I think we haven't mentioned yet is when he's talking to Doris. Doris has just sort of finished laying out the facts for him. And he says, it stinks. And she says, but it's true. And he says, I don't care. It's true. It's not true. It stinks. Right. I don't. That's Freddie Riedenschneider in a nutshell. Right? I don't care.
He's the opposite of the justice system as you describe it. Because if the justice system is about truth and justice, he's about neither. He's the opposite.
The justice system's supposed to be about truth and justice, but it's not doing that, right? I mean, I think he is the justice system. He is its representative, and so
that's not what it is. Yeah.
Right. He's the opposite of what it should be. Exactly. But he's so good at his job because that's what it is, and he knows how to manipulate it. Right. He knows how to play it. And
I like how you connect it to skepticism too, because if you think of like the justice system having an epistemic goal, it's the determination of truth.
Absolutely.
It's not doing that.
No, it's not even trying to. He doesn't care what the truth. He literally doesn't care, and he says that over and over. And there's that great, again, connection to that moment in Big Lebowski where the dude lays it out and says, here's what happened. This is the truth. And Mr. Wealthy Big Lebowski says, okay, so what? Nobody's going to believe you.
You have your story, I got mine.
Yeah. So in both of these films, there are moments where the truth comes out. It is stated. There it is, and ordinarily in an ordinary Hollywood film, that would sort of determine what happens next. And in these films, instead, it just keeps going on. It doesn't make any difference. Somebody says the truth.
Even it
makes no difference.
At the very end, too, I think, this connects back to what we were talking about, his last moments, because he says, I don't know where I'm being taken.
Yeah, that's true. There's uncertainty even at the very end.
Where I'm being taken.
Yeah,
he's being taken into a condition of unknowing.
Yes.
Or he's in a condition of unknowing, anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Oh, no, there is something more I want to say about alienation, too. And again, I think this is kind of a Coen theme, but it's especially, let's do it under philosophical themes. I'm thinking about the ways that Ed is alienated in this film, and we've already talked about a couple in particular. He's being alienated from his job. He doesn't want to accept the identity. He's got a job that, as he puts it, very early in the film, he married into, right? I love that because, of course, it's a foreshadowing of a line we're going to hear again in No Country for Old Men a few years down the road, right? I married into the guy in the gas station is going to say to Anton Chigurh. Big Dave, of course, also married into his job. And
the Big Lebowski.
And the Big Lebowski married into his position. That's right. And in Man Who Wasn't There, Frank, he didn't marry into it, but he inherited it from his father. Like, all of these people are occupying these positions that they didn't make for themselves. They didn't earn or whatever, right? They got it through relations, right? That seems to be how this world is structured. But then there's these other forms of alienation. I mean, Ed is clearly alienated in some ways from Doris. There's a kind of alienation of affection, to use that legal term, going on there. They haven't had sex.
And Dave from Anne, too. I mean, what do you make of that?
And Dave from Anne, absolutely. Yeah, we've got two, deeply alienated marriages.
They haven't had sex since the encounter.
The UFO incident, yes, of course.
Of course, that would be Anne's explanation. Not that Dave is having an affair. It's that.
Right. No,
that
clearly the
more...
UFOs are responsible.
Right.
But I also want to talk about expertise here because Ed is, and here's a place I really feel for Ed. Ed is alienated from his own identity and ability to be an agent in the world. And this goes back to, I think, the attack on his masculinity as well. And two big examples of this, both very moving to me. That first of all, when his wife is accused and arrested and put on trial and so on, he can't defend her. They have to hire an expert. The expert comes in from out of town, right, to do this. Even when he himself is accused, again, he can't defend himself by telling his own story, right? The expert has to be there to do it for him. Even when he tries to tell his own story, as we've noticed.
I'm a lawyer. You're a barber. You know nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. Like, the poor guy,
Man,
all
that's
he needs
brutal.
to do is... It's so
When he says that, I'm like, ouch.
It's so cruel. And this is Ed. I mean, his whole life, the one thing he's an expert at is cutting hair. Well, that doesn't get you a lot of power in this world. Everything else, he has to outsource it in a way, right? Somebody else has to do that. And the other place we see this, of course, is the whole, again, brutal plot line with Birdie, where he's got this music that he loves and he thinks, this is beautiful, right? This consoles me. This gives me solace. This means so much to me. This, at least I'm sure of, right? I can hear it with my own ears. I can tell you're a great player and so on. Then he goes to the expert and the guy says to him, no, she's terrible. She has I am expert, he says, right? Again, you know nothing. I'm the expert. Right. You know nothing. It's the same old story again, right? Like, poor Ed. Every time he tries to act in the world, or to be present in the world, somebody tells him, no, you can't do that. You don't have the authority, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the expertise to do it. You just shut up. I'll tell you what to say. I'll tell you what to do. You play your little role and go back to the barbershop.
I mean, that's why this world is so cruel, because it gives you these ideals, it gives you these desires, it gives you these, and then it also just will take them away and humiliate you and deprive you and leave you, completely empty, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think the condition of incarceration, of being imprisoned, is essentially the logical endpoint of what's being done to all these people, right? Everything is being taken away from them. So,
there's a way in which here he could have become more of an existential hero, but failed. And in a way, Frank had it, except he was unconscious about it. But like, it's with the hair again, because so one way for Camus that you confront an absurd universe with is something like, he talks about rebellion, maybe especially, and there's various forms of that. But just think of Sisyphus. Well, Sisyphus keeps on rolling the ball. It should be a punishment, but no, he finds meaning in it. Well, what's the Sisyphusian moment here? It's the hair. It keeps on growing. You push your ball to the top of the hill. You cut the hair, and it just comes back again.
Wow.
And
that's
instead
great.
of embracing that
great.
and just becoming Sisyphusian about hair, about being a barber, He wants to transcend. He
God,
wants
you're right.
to escape.
Great
he
point.
wants transcendence out of that.
He wants to step outside of that endless cycle and
Yeah.
make sense of it. Whereas, Frank's response, he says, this hair just keeps on coming. And Frank's like, yeah, lucky for us. Right?
Lucky for us. Right?
Which is a great response in a way, yeah.
He's the Sisyphusian hero.
Yes, I love it. The other thing I love about that I hadn't thought of is because, of course, the myth of Sisyphus is all about the question of suicide. And this is one of the Coen brothers films that has a suicide. It's not much discussed, but it's there. Doris ends up killing herself. And it's something that connects it, I think, with the Hudsucker Proxy, which, as we know, this is also largely about suicide. Wow. And then with coming up Inside Llewyn Davis, where the guy is haunted by the suicide of his friends. So, nice. Yeah, that's really
We
good.
must imagine the barber
Sisyphus happy. We must imagine the barber happy. That's right.
One thing the dude could say about Sisyphus: the creep could roll.
Right. That's the Sisyphusian moment there. Right? Roll those fucking balls over and over and over. Anyway.
What do you say we move into some Coen brothers themes?
Sounds good.
And let me just let me just throw out some, because I have just little notes. I don't want to dive too deep into this, but this is another film about nihilism, which we've mentioned before, and appearance in reality, which we've talked about. It's also a film about rugs. In an interesting way.
Oh my gosh,
right?
you're
it's
right.
A film about rugs, so that's a theme.
Holy
They
cow.
love rugs. Also, this is the first of, and we've mentioned the first of two films that makes explicit reference to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Of course, the other one being A Serious Man, and more questions of masculinity and more questions about class distinction, which we've seen the Coen brothers so, I think, subtly and so implicitly talk about class distinctions. I don't even know if sometimes they realize that or are aware that they're talking about class distinctions, but I think this film really nails it. And this question that you both are talking about is his being the barber and what that represents. And anyway, those are some thoughts. But you guys, what do you have for Coen brothers themes?
Well, I think you went through them pretty well, Robert. I mean, I feel like this is a very clear film about nihilism, and it has very strong existentialist themes. It's a film about noir. That's a very Coen brothers. I think it's about male struggles with other males. It's about dealing with the big things of capitalism and how people are let's just say disrupts people's lives, unseats people's lives. I think that's an ongoing theme. I think skepticism, as you said, is ongoing here too, in the sense of that over and over again we find that what we think is real is only apparent. Who we think people are is not who they really are. We suffer, and these characters suffer conditions of unknowing and uncertainty, and they struggle with those. So, in this one, I think nihilism wins, and skepticism remains undefeated. That's one thing I want to mention. Maybe it's not exactly a Coen Brothers theme, but there's a way in which pregnancy, figures in here that I think is, to me, fits in my darker reading of it generally, in the sense that at the end of Lebowski, the appearance of a baby is a signifier of something positive, and the human comedy, it carries on and on. Here, the human comedy seems to be dying with not a bang, but a whimper, and I feel like that. The failure of that pregnancy is a symbol of that.
I was going to say also in Fargo, where Frances McDormand is also
right.
pregnant. That's another case where I think the pregnancy has a certain pall.
It does.
There's a little bit of a shroud over that one.
Yeah, what's that baby facing? Yeah.
That is what
You're
we
right.
talked about. Troy's talked about with us. Troy, what do you have?
Maybe it is a theme.
the darkness, the dark aspects of bringing a new human life into the world.
Yeah, or failing to do so, as in this case. Yeah.
What do you think?
You guys mentioned a lot. I think the main thing I want to talk a little about, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, is connections with the film that preceded it, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Because I've got this idea, I've mentioned it before, I think that the Coens like to make films in pairs in a way, and so they'll do a film and then they'll do the next film and it looks like completely the opposite, right? Like everything about it's different. And yet you look beneath the surface and you see these sort of, underlying commonalities and so on. And I think this is a case where we have that. So in so many ways, they're opposites or they're mirror images of each other. It's fascinating to me, first of all, that these films are set just about a decade apart. I mean, they're so different in their tone and their feel and so on. But Oh Brother, Where Art Thou apparently set in 1937. This one's set in 1949. So I think we have this sense on some level of how much the world and the country have changed from the mid to late 30s to a decade later, right? The late 1940s. Visually, of course, they're diametrically opposed. Oh Brother is colorful. I mean, it's saturated in color. It's almost cartoonish at times. Its world draws on myth, and it feels mythical in many ways. The Man Who Wasn't There is black and white, full of shadows. Even the daytime scenes often feel like they're taking place at night. As a neo-noir, it's very modern, whereas there's nothing modern about the rural environs of Oh Brother. There's nothing that makes it feel modern at all. The Man Who Wasn't There is almost entirely set indoors. Oh Brother mostly takes place outdoors. Musically, they couldn't be more different. You have this, in Oh Brother, this buoyant, jubilant folk and bluegrass soundtrack. Here you've got this foreboding score, sort of, somewhat creepy at times, very lovely in its way, but, certainly not folk or bluegrass. And then combined with some classics from the Western musical canon, mostly Beethoven. The primary protagonist, you've got Ed Crane, who rarely speaks, and then in Oh Brother, you've got Ulysses Everett McGill, who almost never shuts up. There's some interesting connections, I think, between Ulysses and Riedenschneider as two lawyers, right? So we could get into that too if we wanted, but getting to the stuff talking about justice, right? Like I said, Oh Brother is one of the few Coen films that takes place in a just universe. It's got a mostly happy ending, if not a completely happy ending. It concludes, and this I think speaks to the stuff about the pregnancies and so on you guys were just mentioning. It concludes with the restoration of Ulysses McGill's family as he reestablishes himself as the paterfamilias. The family's put back together, right? The Man Who Wasn't There ends with the destruction of a family that it never quite became a family, sort of on the verge, and then now it never will be. Doris dies, the unborn child dies, who was never Ed's child anyway, and soon Ed's going to die.
That's a great connection.
I mean, you start looking at this, there's so many connections between these films, right?
Well, do it with Raising Arizona, too. So, I was struck by that scene where Ed is lying on the bed. It's just the same way H.I. McDonough is laying on his prison bunk.
Yeah,
but in H.I.'s case, a family, at least is in a dreamy way, imagined at the end.
That's right. Sense. Though, again, I've argued that as with the Hudsucker Proxy, it's a fake happy ending, but whatever. It's there. I mean,
think a good contrast here, too, would be, in the sense of like Hudsucker, where there's like the happy capitalist in a way, although, of course, we've problematized that too, but there's this, the lovers are together. The company is going to be flourishing under the leadership of a virtuous man. Here, the pursuit of there is no good capitalism. There's only being crushed by
capitalist aspirations, right? Lead to destruction and death. That's right. Yeah, it's just a hopeless sort of situation.
I mean, there's no Muncie Eagles that are going to save you from this.
No, that's right. there definitely are not. No.
Forget those fucking
Go Eagles.
We hate the Eagles. I hadn't thought of that connection there.
There you go. That's right.
Husky and Muncie.
Hate the fucking Eagles. That's right. Oh Brother and Man Who Wasn't There. Prison is central to both. You got the threat of prison Arizona. Hovering over the character, and Raising Arizona. That's right. It's there as well, interestingly. But of course, the direction's completely different, right? In Oh Brother, we start with the escape from prison, and they remain free for the entire film, and the end of the film sort of solidifies their freedom. Whereas in Man Who Wasn't There, Ed and Doris are, free in some sense at the start of the film, and then they both end up in prison and presumably on the way to death at the end.
Right. We're really running wild now. I have another connection. One is so if Anton Chigurh is a kind of representation of nihilism, his bad haircut, that's what happens when you don't have a good barber. You end up with Anton Chigurh. The barbers are the ones keeping Chigurh at bay. But somehow that guy escaped the barbers.
He needs a good barber. Yeah,
that's why.
As Ed says, everybody needs a haircut.
Sooner or later, that's right. Everyone needs a haircut.
What happened to Chigurh? Chigurh needs a really big haircut.
I love
I
it.
think the executive contour would look good on Anton Chigurh.
That would be amazing.
Oh,
He would be just a different man. So anyway, I think, when we look at this stuff, I think that the Coens are setting these two movies up as these two diametrically opposed visions of America. And the fact that one of them happens about a decade after the other is, really sort of frightening. But the thing that started me thinking about this was a very specific thing. It was thinking about Ed being executed in the electric chair at the end of his film, and about the little speech that Everett McGill makes towards the end of Oh Brother, right, where they're on the barrel after the flood. And he says, yes, sir, the South is going to change. Everything's going to be put on electricity and run on a paying basis.
Ooh,
Out with the old spiritual mumbo jumbo, the superstitions and the backward ways. We're going to see a brave new world where they run everyone a wire and hook us all up to a grid. Listen to that. They run everyone a wire and hook us all up to a grid. Exactly what happens to Ed Crane, right? Yes, sir, he says, a veritable age of reason, like the one they had in France. He even mentions France, which, of course, is where many of the experts in The Man Who Wasn't There, who caused such alienation, come from. I tell you, I think this is intentional. They're doing this little, these surreptitious connections between these two films.
One little bit of trivia. There is no electric chair in California, and there never has been an electric chair in California. There is a gas chamber. So,
why do they think they put it in that white space too? I thought that was like almost like a dreamy quality of it.
I was going to mention that. I thought the final scene, it really raises questions like the end of Raising Arizona.
It does.
Questions of, wait, is this now what's real? What's really going on? Because they hit you over the head with how surreal it is, how unreal it is.
Yeah.
And everything's big. It reminded me of Lebowski when his dream sequence when everything's pretty gigantic, like his shadows, these kind of weird shadows. When that guy has this giant lever, to put the. I thought, what the hell's going on here? This is obviously not real, right? So.
It feels like he's imagining it. I wondered at one point whether he was imagining sort of being inside a UFO, because that's kind of.
I thought about that stuff
like,
too.
right?
The white light of the UFO.
Yeah. It feels like he's in a UFO, and that's where it's taking place. So,
returning to your comparison with Oh Brother, and we talked about voluptuousness there, and there's like this film is the opposite of voluptuous. I mean, the closest you get to it is when you see Frances McDormand, dressing in the beginning, but almost nothing else has anything really remotely voluptuous. Maybe when Birdie's playing the piano. There's something voluptuous.
There's beauty in it. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's not an erotic film at all, but it is a beautiful film. And I mean, Robert and I, we rewatched it the other night. And we're talking about how there's so many shots that you could pause and just stare at as if it was a painting. Like, it's so gorgeously composed. And the cinematographer, Roger Deakins, what a genius.
Oh, yeah, it's so good.
And, the clothing, the costume people, the production design, whatever, they're all just...
So that's weird. It's almost like voluptuous in its starkness.
Yeah,
it's a kind of chiaroscuro that's...
It is.
Because when I think of Brother Wartner, one of the first things that comes to my mind is like sensuous things.
Right.
The color, the music... And this is like anti-sensuous.
It's bursting with life. Yeah, Oh Brother, We're Out There was bursting with life, and this film is not at all. In fact, I don't think of it as having a lot of living things in it other than the human characters.
Except, as you say, it's so beautiful in its own
beautiful.
dark way. So it's almost gives you that and takes it back.
I mean,
I was reminded, in fact, a film I was going to compare it to when we get to the film place, but maybe I should just mention now, is like... is The Trial, Orson Welles' version of Kafka's Trial, because it just has, to me, some of the feel of that, of the stark, absurd, universe. Not as severe as The Trial, of course, but when even I'm looking at some stills now, and it's the big dark shadows. It's very Giacometti kind of look to it. It's not really kind of a Caravaggio chiaroscuro. No. It's more of a Giacometti chiaroscuro.
Yeah, nice.
Anyway.
Troy, I wanted to raise something. Am I correct? There are no guns in this film.
I believe you are. I was wondering if somebody was going to ask about that. That's right. The Coen gun rule.
The Coen gun rule. Your famous
Coen gun rule does not apply. There are no guns. And so we have to apply it to the knife, right? That's the only, weapon really. And I do think there's a sense in which, the way that Ed wields that little knife. First of all, it's not even his. It's Big Dave's used against him. He picks it up. It's the one little jab. It's sort of like a rigid little tentative jab in a way. Like, and not planned, of course, purely in self-defense, purely just his last resort. And so I do think there are ways in which it expresses his character, but at the same time, we can't go too far with that because we don't know what Ed's character is. He's a mysterious person. It's hard to pin down. So, and yeah, that's really the only overt act of violence, in the film.
Yeah.
And there's no guns. So
No guns.
yeah, the Coen gun rule doesn't really apply here.
Yeah.
They're trying some new things. They're making a movie with no guns. I mean, that's different for them.
I love that stabbing, by the way. It's so quick.
Oh, the
It's so
stabbing's
sudden.
amazing.
You're like, and it does tell you something about Ed because, I even thought like on a legal level, like, I mean, he has got a self-defense argument that, I mean, he's being strangled for goodness sake.
Yeah, he
but
does.
it's also
Though, of course, there's
felony
no witnesses
homicide.
to confirm that. So, he's on shaky ground. But yeah, I know. It is true. He was attacked, though he was blackmailing the guy, too.
That's the felony homicide, but still, I mean,
Yeah.
it's I think from a natural rights point of view, it's like you've always got a right to self-defense. So it was a really interesting thing. By the way, I think that's where Dave confronts him, with what kind of man are you sort of thing, and I think Dave is as angry with his refusal to answer as anything there. He just finds it just entirely provocative that Ed's not going to say, "Oh yeah, I'm the blackmailer." It's another.
Yeah.
It's like the inverse of him with Doris in the prison. He won't say, "Yeah, it was me. It was me, Dave. I'm behind the whole thing."
You
he
could
just
be
kind
right.
of-
Yeah. I mean, Big Dave is so into having an identity that he makes one up. It's so important to him, and Ed just doesn't seem to care.
Troy, the other thing another Jallamore tool of analysis that we didn't talk about, but we probably could get into, is your interiors, exteriors. This film certainly has a lot to look at on that.
Yeah, I think especially obviously the contrast between life outside of prison and existence within prison that becomes so metaphysically important, I think, as the film goes on, and to Ed seems to represent something really deep and profound.
Ed's external reticence, but clearly there's things happening in that head.
That's
all
right.
the
Yeah,
time.
that's right. The outside and the inside. I mean, he's thinking all the time, and he's got this voice going. If the narration, is really representing what he's thinking, but everyone thinks of him as just sitting there doing nothing. So,
Well, guys, what do you say we move into the music / soundtrack? And I think Peter Fossil, you had somewhere you wanted to go with that.
Well, I mean, so I thought it interesting that, Beethoven makes this appearance. And what's this saying about Ed? I want to read Ed as a kind of tragic, not even the cipher of modern man kind of thing. But he does have this immediate and profound response to Beethoven. And I wondered, what we thought about it. If there was something in him that was, purely a kind of person with the kinds of, values and a kind of, appreciation of reality of the world. It's the way beauty functions for him there with musical beauty, and it is. And of course, it's the pathetic sonata. So we're dealing with a pathetic man in a way in a pathetic situation, but it is so beautiful, and it. Then I love how the film raises this question, because if you were like me, you were like Ed. I was kind of going along with Ed, being moved by her playing, and then you get this asshole telling you that it's soulless. You're like, well, I mean, I didn't find it that way, and so I read it as a signifier that Ed is not all empty. On the other hand, there is something pathetic about his interest in this girl. It doesn't seem to come across quite as prurient as like a Humbert or something like that. On the other hand, she's got to be a teenager, and he's got this fantasy that he's going to be her manager, lead her to a life of commercial and public success, and ride her coattails into a life of more that's got more comfort and more, travel and more, excitement in it. That's kind of pathetic to me, that he would turn to a teenager and construct this fantasy, life about how he's going to go forward. That, to me, suggested a really small and empty man. So it made me rethink that signifier of the music. First, you get this one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written, being played, and it pulls at your heartstrings, and you find out like maybe though riding underneath that is something extremely shallow, petty, and even a little bit creepy, frankly. Even when he approaches her when she's playing the piano, it's in this dark space. It's almost like he's creeping up on her, to attack her or something, or like he's stalking her. She's all by herself in this vulnerable situation. And here comes this guy. So those are some of the thoughts I had about it. I wonder what your response is.
I do tend to be sympathetic to Ed, especially in this place. He's clearly not a great person in certain ways, but for whatever reason, I am more inclined to think that his response to what he hears as the beauty of her playing is genuine, and the beauty of the music itself. And I think maybe as I think about it, as I reflect on it, that's partly because that makes it more poignant and more tragic when they go to see the French Jacques Carcanog, whatever it is, and he just puts Ed in his place. I think that Ed is just astonished. I think that there's a way in which it never occurred to Ed that he could be wrong about that. I mean, he can hear it for himself, totally. Right? Yeah. And so to be told by somebody, that no, actually, this is not good. It's not, I can hear that it's beautiful. No, it's actually not beautiful, right? That's a crazy position to be in. So I think that.
But did you find the guy persuasive? I was just like,
Jacques? I don't know. He's so pretentious. Who knows, right? I think maybe he's really exaggerating. He's in a bad mood that day. It's hard to say exactly. Yeah. Again, as with so many things in this film, it's the uncertainty principle, right? We don't actually know whether she's a good player or not. We have one person who thinks she is, one person who thinks she isn't. Yeah, the second guy's expert, right? But still, you can't always trust, and it's just one individual opinion, so who knows?
Yeah.
But that said, you're right about the creepiness. And, there's that amazingly awkward scene after the talent show or whatever it is where, she's out there in the parking lot with her age-appropriate friend, and then Ed walks up and sort of won't leave. Oh, man, it's so hard to watch. It's so awkward.
That's why there's a great inversion because, you're thinking, oh, this innocent, whatever, teenager, she's the prey. But then you find out later, oh, she's not entirely prey.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
She's got her own desires, and she's going to act on them. And
she's an
they're
agent.
quite adult, in fact.
Yeah, he's an enthusiast, but so is she. So.
She is.
Yeah. Robert, what do you think?
Focusing on the question of whether or not he has an erotic attraction to Birdie, of course, for me, the film that popped to mind was American Beauty, where it's obviously he's obsessed.
Oh, nice.
But I think one of the similarities is that the woman child is an object of projection and transformation and transcendence. In American Beauty, the Kevin Spacey character is going to regain his virility and his youth and his manhood through this young woman, who turns out, interestingly, there's an opposite. She's like a seductress, and she's very, very openly sexual. But it turns out that she's never had any experience whatsoever. And then Birdie, we get the 180, right? So I think there's a interesting pairing with those two.
Great comparison. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that there is a sexual component with Ed. I'm not convinced there is a certain kind of. I see what you're saying when they're in Nerdlingers and he first hears the piano, and there is a certain noir creepiness to it. But the way I read it was, he's drawn to this. He hears this sound, and he's taken away. Of course, what's going on in the other room is this party and this, and the music there. Mm-hmm. But I saw him. He's just drawn to this entity, this thing, this experience that turns out to be Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and of course Birdie is the source of it. So, and the other thing is there's a little bit of a Coen brothers backstory on this, is that if you notice, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but there's a scene where he's sitting there and Birdie is playing, and it looks like he's aroused in his pants. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
I did not notice, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And so I thought, what the hell's going on with that scene? But then what I read afterwards is that Billy Bob Thornton, that was a gag, and he made it look like he had an erection. And when he pointed that out to the Coen brothers after the fact, they said, oh, no. He's not sexual. There's no sexual attraction. This is not about sexual attraction. So in the Coen world, it's not a sexual attraction. Now, does that mean that it's not? Of course not. That's not definitive. But what I was thinking is the music, with regard to the music. First of all, going to Carter Burwell's soundtrack, and Troy, you mentioned this. I think it's like a masterpiece of the neo-noir genre. There's some beautiful, like the poignant, if you look on the album, there's a thing called The Trial of Ed Kane. That particular piece is so beautiful and it's so moving, and it's touching, very poignant. But then there's a piece called Ed Visits Dave, and man, that is some dark music. And there's a section, if you listen to that little selection of the soundtrack, he has the string bass with with the bow, the arc, and they put a lot of that resin on it, and the way that he has it sound, it's scarier than Jaws in a way. It's like and I'm like, oh shit, that's creeping me out just listening to it. So very powerful soundtrack I think it's not as extensive as his other stuff, for example Hudsucker, which is spectacular, but I think it's one of his best soundtracks for the Coens. But what I wanted to here was my view of the music, is that they center the film musically on this basically Beethoven, but in particular the Adagio from the Pathétique Sonata, and it's a little trivia. It's performed by this professor at Juilliard, who's a piano professor, who's still there. So I thought that was interesting. But here's what I was thinking. So Beethoven provides something for Ed. It's a grounding in the past. It's a grounding in the Western tradition. And rather than being the modern man, right? In the past, there was clarity on like, what is my role as a man, and what do we do in America, and what gives me meaning? But that's all thrown to shambles. And so the Beethoven, to me, it kind of represents for Ed a source of stability and clarity and certainty, which of course is a theme. And I noticed that he and Bertie, when he says, "Don't you like that music?" So here's a kid, she's 16 or 17, and she doesn't like the quote new music, right? She likes Beethoven.
Right.
She even says, "I don't really like music that much." And so I think part of what they share, and this is, maybe this is another stretch, but another Scarlett Johansson film with Steve Buscemi, I think it's called Dream World or something. Steve Buscemi.
Oh, is that Ghost World?
Ghost World. And was it Thorna Birch?
Thora Birch,
Thorna Birch.
right.
Anyway, that's a film. Steve Buscemi is kind of a guy who's caught in the past and falls in love with Thora Birch, and similar theme of like, this young woman is going to revive my manhood and my vitality. But what I'm getting at is that it's looking to the past and associating that with this young ingenue, this girl, and giving you a sense of stability in your manhood. And again, even if it isn't a romantic thing, it's just the platonic, or a quote, kind of platonic relationship where he has this mentor role, right? Let's do this. Let's take Ed at his word. So he really does feel like, and it's so interesting. He thinks, okay, what am I going to do now? What's going to happen now? Oh, here's what's going to set. Here's the meaning that my life is going to have. I'm going to be the agent mentor for this young phenom on the piano, right? So I do think that I think it's a decent read to think there's not a sexual attraction. The music represents something about the past that instills a sense of certainty for Ed, and it brings them together, because she's definitely a weirdo for her time. In 1949, the kids are doing Bobby's, whatever those, what's that dance they used to do? Not the...
I don't know, the mashed potato.
No. 49. It was the
49. Yeah.
The Nerdlinger hustle, I think.
Yeah, there's the
big band swing stuff.
Yeah. There's a dance, the jitterbug.
The jitterbug.
The kids were doing jitterbugs, and anyway, That's my take on the music. If that means
Well,
Nice,
usually
That's cool.
you're darker than I am on these things, but I just feel like there's, I mean, despite what they say, he comes to her in her bedroom at one point. Like, the father's downstairs on the phone. He goes up to talk to her in her bedroom, and she's odalisque, sort of spread across the bed there. I mean, I think it's understated, and I don't think that the critical read depends upon an eros there, but because it's still like when you talk about American Beauty, I don't know what you think about this, but I feel like the guy is pathetic in there too, and it's kind of it's like that scene with the paper bag floating around. Is that really beautiful or is that really pathetic? And
the plastic bag.
Yeah, the plastic bag. Sorry, the plastic bag. And I think the protagonist of that film is kind of pathetic, and I think Humbert is kind of pathetic. This idea of finding, transcendence. He comes by the way, before he goes to visit her in her bedroom, he goes to the. We even talked about the seance woman, whatever. The mystic. He's so desperate. He's looking, and he wants to talk to Doris's spirit, through her. I mean, that's kind of pathetic too, and he realizes it himself as he leaves there. He says something like, "I've got to turn my back on all these ghosts, all these dead people, before they suck me in." And so he moves from like trying to talk to the dead to talking to this young, vivacious, young person. And I mean, I just have a slightly darker reading, but I hear what you're saying, and I think you can go with it that way too. That there's something more virtuous about their relationship.
And I think too, it fits with Ed because Ed's not a very sexual being.
Well, again, it doesn't have to be sex to be pathetic, but
no, I'm saying
he's not a very sexual.
I'm saying the attraction to the girl as being one of that is not involved.
It's genuine. Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I go with that.
Well, fellas, what do you say we jump into our last category, cinematic / plot / character observations. And there's a lot to talk about with regard to the cinematic aspects of the film. But who wants to jump in?
Let me start with something sort of obvious we've discussed a little bit, Robert, you and I. And this we could have put under Coen Brothers themes, actually. The UFO is kind of a visual motif for this circular object.
The flying saucers are all over the place.
They're all over this movie when you start to look for them. Robert, you found a few that I hadn't noticed before and sent some shots. The obvious example I noticed when we watched it the other day was the hubcap after the car accident. And what I loved about this particular one, and I commented on it at the time, was that not only does the hubcap, which detaches from the car and goes rolling down the hill and so on, not only does it invoke the UFOs that we see elsewhere in the film, it also invokes Hudsucker Proxy, I'm thinking, his two successes, basically, because at first it's rolling along like the hula hoop does on the street. And then when it sort of lifts off into the air to become the UFO, it looks like the Frisbee that he throws at the end of the Hudsucker Proxy. So
excellent.
I loved that. And then, of course, at that point,
I saw the tumbleweed in that. But
the tumbleweed. Good, right. Well, I mean, their movies are full of circles. Ball. So the bowling, but there's so all of these just relate to each other. But I really saw Hudsucker Proxy in that when I watched it the other day.
For kids.
For kids.
Oh, yeah, that was a great observation.
Yeah, some of the moments, I was just trying in my head thinking through. There were so many here. I mean, I loved when Tony Shalhoub, Riedenschneider's, constructing his uncertainty theory there, and he's like looking up into the light, like they're through the bars. So it connects back with your little Platonic readings, but. You could just see him putting it all together, pulling all these different theories, but he's doing it from within this dark space, looking out towards freedom, out towards knowledge, out towards who knows whatever the light is indicating there. But it's almost like he's having a moment of inspiration, and I loved how they did that. I loved the scene where Anne comes by, and she's got these bug eyes like a bird. That are just, to me indicated it's humorous, but it's also like terror, like she's kind of terrified. It seems like she's always walking around with those terrified bug eyes, but she's also wearing a veil, which is like, something about grief,
Well, she's in mourning. Isn't she in mourning from Dave's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's like mourning Dave's, but it's, I mean, one wears a veil to church, one wears a veil maybe like to special occasions, maybe in the street in those days, because people dressed up more. But just when you're coming over to somebody's house in the middle of the night because you're having an emotional crisis, a veil, I mean, it worked for me. I thought it was just wonderful the way it all pulled her together, and her bone structure too. Being on that porch, I just, that scene just, really sucked me in. So those are two things that I thought were really brilliant. There were other scenes where like he walks out of buildings and you have these long black shadows that are just, enveloping him. But again, sometimes there's a light beaming out. So you've got these themes of, which goes, of course, obviously with noir type filming, but of what's in the light and what's in the shadow. And what noir tells you right away, just from its cinematic qualities, is there's a lot in the shadows. In fact, and we're gonna go there. We're gonna take you into those shadow spaces. And I thought they just handled that really well. And in contrast, the barbershop's all white. It's, highly, groomed and clean and sparkling. The electrocution scene's all white, and as Troy made that connection between the electric chair and the barber chairs in these white spaces. I thought that was, wonderful cinematic sort of things too. That just the way that the camera would sometimes linger on Ed's face, especially, because you could say like, look, do we have to see him smoking again? How much of this film? I'd love to see him just total up how many minutes are spent watching Ed smoke. It's a lot. And yet you feel like that guy, didn't Billy Bob Thornton get several awards out of this, but he could say a lot by smoking and not speaking, more than most actors, express by speaking. And I thought I could just watch him smoke for a long time. And I thought that's really good cinematic work. If you could sit here and watch someone smoke for a long time. Anyway, there's a few things right off the top of my head anyway.
Well, I think Roger Deakins, this is one of his greatest, at least that I know of his films. It's one of his greatest works of capturing faces. And I going to Billy Bob Thornton or Ed's face, I found myself so entranced when he was on the screen many times. I even said to Troy, we were watching,
right?
I said, Billy Bob Thornton's face is the way it's shot. It was mesmerizing. I would look at the way Deakins lit it. There was always a shadow or a line or something that just drew you into this face again. And like you said, all he's doing is sitting there and smoking. So I thought that was pretty amazing.
It was amazing.
And one thing we didn't mention is this 3 films stuck out in my mind. Double Indemnity, of course, and the film Shadow of a Doubt, the Hitchcock film, which is also shot in Santa Rosa and involves very similar duplicity. And then, of course, The Postman Always Rings Twice. Yeah. The ending is very similar, where the protagonist is sentenced to death for the wrong murder, but he did murder.
And Double Indemnity, too, yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that narrated by...
Double Indemnity, the whole film is narrated by the Fred McMurray character, who's speaking into a dictation machine and sort of telling how do they really go. He seems a little more credible than Ed does, that's for sure. Say a couple more plot cinematic observations. We've mentioned the intersection between Big Dave and the Big Lebowski. They're both... I don't know if I was thinking, Big Dave has a bullshit war story, and I wonder, it's not clear whether the Big Lebowski has a bullshit war story.
But you wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
either.
yeah. I mean, we expect him to not be actually bound to the wheelchair, but he is. So then it raises the question: were his legs really taken by a Chinaman? We don't know. And then one thing I wanted to say too was when we first meet Frank. He's giving that kid a haircut, and he's lecturing this kid about early French settlers and fur trappers and come to America and how they come and get their pelts and they get their ignots, and then and that sort of, as I was telling Troy, that was to me they were riffing on the the Larry Sellers Louisiana Purchase essay. For some reason, the Coens are really into the history of French
That's a
settlers in
brilliant
America.
connection. That's totally true.
The
You
quote,
got it.
the quote, most interesting purchase in history.
That's a great connection.
Two more quick things. Big Dave makes reference to beating it out of the pansy, and that reminded me, of course, of Walter's solution to the how are you going to find out where Bunny is? I'll beat it out of him. It's like, yeah, great Swiss watch. And the last thing I was going to mention is the notion of the barber as murderer is not original, of course, right? You have Sweeney Todd, and throughout history, barbers have been notorious for bleeding people out too much. So the fact that Ed turns out to be someone who murders via a knife, you can say in a way he's a professional knife handler, or at least he's a professional blade handler. And so the fact that he ends Dave's life via those methods is not out of character with at least the sort of fictional history of barbers. So there is that aspect. But that's about all I have to say.
This is a Coen connection that I can't claim credit for. I read it somewhere or heard it somewhere. I wish I could give the person credit, but I've forgotten. But so the hotel where, what's the salesman staying? I forgot his name already.
Creighton
it's
Tolliver.
called, yeah.
Tolliver,
right.
yeah.
Tolliver, yeah. It's called the Hobart Arms.
Yeah.
But that's an anagram of the Barton Arms, where Tom Regan stayed in Miller's Crossing, which itself refers to Barton Fink and his hotel. So there's like a triple layering of allusions in
Those
the name
Coen
of that
brothers,
little
man.
hotel. I know, that's so Coen, right?
I love it.
Like, whoever noticed that, kudos to you. That's a good,
Yeah.
it's a very kudos Coen connection there.
Well, fellas, do you have anything else you want to?
I've got to praise, first of all, a line reading. There's so many great line readings in this, but God, the way when they're in the church at bingo night and Doris gets bingo, and she says,
the way she says
Jesus, bingo. Just makes me laugh every time. It's so good. And the fact that they're in church and she says Jesus to it, I just love it. The whole thing it's a beautiful little moment. It's such a good
so
character
Doris,
moment.
too.
It's so Doris.
It's so Doris.
Another moment that really makes me laugh every time, this one at the end of the film, when he's about to be executed in this weird space we talk about, and you've got the line of witnesses who are there to watch him, and he's looking at the witnesses, and you see that he's sort of looking at the tops of their heads, right? He's looking at their hair.
Their hair.
This is the last thing he's thinking on his way to his death. Like, he's looking at each haircut and kind of thinking, the executive contour, that guy didn't know what he was doing. So he really is the barber at this point, I guess.
Really
he's really become it.
That set was so weird with that row of heads there like that.
It's so weird. Whoever designed that.
Yeah.
I think about that line, modern man, all the time, right? He is modern man. He said, I was modern man, and so on. Modern does, the word modern, because I think this is so much a movie about modern life and, the world being modernized. Again, the difference between Oh Brother even and this film 12 years later. And the word modern does appear a couple times in the film, but not very much. And it's not spoken anywhere else, I think. But at one point, he's looking at a newspaper or something, and there's an ad for dry cleaning. And it says, in fact, there's two interesting things here. It says, next to godliness, dry cleaning sweeps the nation, the thoroughly modern way to clean. So you've got modern, and then you've got it juxtaposed with godliness. Now, again, we've got very little religion in this film. We've got very few religious references, but there's one. And this idea that this new technological way of cleaning things without water would be godly or holy, or at least next to godliness. On the other place, and I misspoke, actually, modern is spoken one other time. It's by the driveway guy, the tar macadam salesman, who comes in and says at one point, and I think he's cut off by Doris, but he's saying, he was, what is it? I was just telling your husband here about tar macadam for the home driveway. These are the specs. It's the modern way too, he says. And then she cuts him off at that point. So,
well, everyone, thanks for listening to No Podcast for Old Men, the Man Who Wasn't There edition. Anyway, what's our next? I hate this. Is our next film what I think it is?
Yeah. I think
Intolerable Cruelty.
I'm thinking what you're thinking.
Oh,
yes, we're in for some rocky waters
Wow.
ahead. Even the geniuses that are the Coen brothers perform at less than full throttle occasionally.
Wow. Okay, well, we'll have things to talk about. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you at our next episode. Take good care,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.